Hello everyone. Please take your seat, please everyone. Hello. Good morning everyone. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Romanuddin. I am a research associate at Center for Governance Studies, and I am honored to be hosting this exciting event today in conversation with Milam and John. Before we dive into the conversation, I want to take a moment to recognize that today is the International Women's Day. A, heart, a heartfelt salute to all the women in the world and the incredible women in this room. Your strength, resilience, and contribution make the world a better place to live every day. And on a slightly less significant is that, and personally special note that today is also happens to be my birthday. So I suppose that it makes the double celebration. So I encourage all of you, and I would like to extend my warm welcome to all of you. It's wonderful to see that many people here today who share an interest in the evolving dynamics of Bangladesh-US relations. We are fortunate to have two distinguished guests with us, the former US Ambassador to Bangladesh, William B. Milam, and the former US diplomat, John F. Danielowicz. Both of them have an invaluable insight into this crucial subject, and today's event will be a unique opportunity for all of us to learn from their vast experience. I encourage all of you to take notes during the sessions, and also I will encourage you to do it very valuable and also very interactive. Now, this is your chance to explore important aspects in the relationship between our two countries, especially in light of the recent political changes in Bangladesh after the mass uprising and also newly elected president in the USA. Now I would like to invite the chair of the Center for Governance Studies, Ms. Munira Khan, to deliver her opening remarks and set the stage for today's event. Ms. Munira Khan.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, distinguished guests, respected speakers, and participants. It is both an honor and a privilege for the Center for Governance Studies to host today's engaging and thought-provoking session in conversation with Milam and John. We are very happy to welcome former US Ambassador to Bangladesh, William B. Milam, and former US diplomat John F. Danielowicz to share their valuable insights into the evolving dynamics of Bangladesh-US relations. Our discussions today are particularly timely, as the relationship between Bangladesh and the United States have experienced significant shifts, especially in light of recent developments. From the foundational pillars of economic collaborations to the challenges posed by political dynamics, this bilateral relationship has navigated through an intricate maze of regional and global events. And as we look forward to the future, there are new strategic challenges and opportunities for both nations to explore, especially in the context of Bangladesh's changing political scenarios after the mass uprising. Historically, the relationship between Bangladesh and the United States has been multifaceted. From the days following Bangladesh's independence in 1971, the US has been a key partner in Bangladesh's development, particularly in areas of economic aid, trade, and security cooperation. However, as with any long-term relationship, there have been fluctuations. The US involvement in Bangladesh has not been without its complexities also, especially in the last 2 decades, where factors such as regional politics, domestic political shifts in Bangladesh have continuously reshaped the ties between our two nations. As we all know, the events of the past years, particularly the mass uprising that occurred, have created a turning point in this bilateral relationship. Today's conversation will delve into the evolution of those relations with a focus on how the US has engaged with Bangladesh amidst international political turbulence and how global strategic shifts such as the US's Indo-Pacific strategy are shaping future interactions. The role of Bangladesh as a growing regional player strategically positioned at the crossroads of South Asia will undoubtedly continue to be a significant factor in how the US views and interacts with Bangladesh. In closing, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our esteemed speakers for joining us today. Ambassador Milam's extensive diplomatic experience and Mr. Danilo's operational insights promise to provide a comprehensive overview of the Bangladesh-US relationship from a unique on-the-ground perspective. We look forward to hearing their thoughts and to the stimulating discussion that will follow, I'm sure. Thank you. Thank you for all being here. I am confident that today's session will provide invaluable knowledge and foster further understanding of this important bilateral relationship with US and Bangladesh. Thank you again. Thank you very much, and I hope the session you will enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for your valuable remarks. Now, I would like to invite the Executive Director of Center for Governance Studies, Mr. Jilur Rahman, for his speech and also moderate the session. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum, adab, namaskar, and good morning. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Center for Governance Studies, CGS, I welcome you all to this very special conversation with two remarkable individuals, former US Ambassador to Bangladesh, William B. Milam, and retired US diplomat, John F. Danilovich. Thank you for joining us this morning. I can sense the anticipation in the room as we gather to discuss a timely and profoundly significant topic: the state of human rights and democracy in Bangladesh and what it means for Bangladesh-US relations as we look ahead. This event is part of CGS' ongoing commitment to fostering open dialogue on governance and international cooperation. I'm delighted to see such an engaged audience so early in the day, eager to explore these pressing issues. This morning's conversation could not be more relevant. Bangladesh stands at a defining moment in its history, where after the overthrow of an authoritarian government through a mass uprising, we wonder how the values of democracy, human rights, and good governance will shape the future of our nation. At the same time, Bangladesh's relationship with the United States continues to evolve, rooted in economic and strategic cooperation, but increasingly framed by discussions about democratic principles and the rule of law. Over the past decades, we have witnessed moments of great triumph for democracy and periods of authoritarian rule. As we emerge from those challenges and work towards stronger institutions, we must reflect on how international friends like the United States have engaged with and supported during these times. That is why today's discussion on the past, present, and future of Bangladesh-US relations is so important. And who better to help us explore these than two individuals who have played instrumental roles in this relationship. Let me introduce Ambassador William Bill Milam, a name deeply connected to Bangladesh's democratic journey. Ambassador Milam is a highly respected American diplomat who served as the United States ambassador to Bangladesh from 1990 to 1993. Those were pivotal years for us. Similar to today, Bangladesh was transitioning from nearly a decade of authoritarian rule to a restored democracy. Ambassador Milam arrived in Dhaka when the flames of pro-democracy activism were burning bright and our people were eager to reclaim their rights. During his tenure, he was not just a foreign envoy observing from a distance. He became a true friend and partner of the Bangladeshi people. We remember how actively he engaged with our society, meeting leaders across the spectrum, encouraging dialogue, and standing firmly for free and fair elections, press freedom, and human rights. As Bangladesh held its first election in the 1990s and laid the groundwork for democratic governance, Ambassador Milam's support and wise counsel were invaluable. Ambassador Milam's diplomatic career extended far beyond Bangladesh. He later served as US ambassador to Pakistan from 1998 to 2001, overseeing US foreign policy in a particularly complex period in South Asia. He has also held essential postings in West Africa, working on governance challenges and peace processes. Even after his official service ended, Ambassador Milam has advocated for human rights and democracy in South Asia. He is also working with Woodrow Wilson Center, and he continues to write and speak passionately about the importance of democratic governance, most recently leading Right to Freedom, an international human rights initiative dedicated to defending democracy and exposing political repression. Through his ongoing advocacy, he has remained an unwavering supporter of Bangladesh's democratic aspirations. We are truly honored to have him with us today. Now I am privileged to introduce Mr. John F. Danilovich, another distinguished guest well known in Dhaka's diplomatic and civil society circles. Mr. Danilovich is a retired senior US Foreign Service officer who served in Bangladesh during two critical diplomatic assignments. Most notably, he was stationed at the US Embassy in Dhaka during the military-backed caretaker government period of 2007-2008, when Bangladesh was under a state of emergency, political activities were restricted, and civil liberties were under threat. As Counselor for Political and Economic Affairs from 2007 to 2011, and late as Deputy Chief of Mission from 2012 to 2014, Mr. Danilovich worked tirelessly alongside the Bangladeshi people to advocate for a return to democratic governance. He was one of the key diplomats who engaged behind the scenes to ensure democracy prevailed, whether supporting dialogues between political parties, voicing concerns about human rights violations, or coordinating international support for free elections. His efforts helped Bangladesh regain its democratic footing. The election of 2008 and the return to civilian government owe much to the principled diplomacy of individuals like him. Beyond Bangladesh, Mr. Danilovich's career has been defined by his dedication to promoting democracy and human rights. He has held postings in some of the most challenging US diplomatic assignments, including serving as principal officer in Peshawar, Pakistan, and later as charge affairs in South Sudan, where he worked in conflict resolution and state building efforts. His extensive experience in complex environments demonstrates his deep commitment to international peace, stability, and governance. Even after leaving his official assignments in Bangladesh, Mr. Danilovich has steadfastly advocated for our country's democratic process. He has spoken and written about Bangladesh's challenges, always emphasizing the need for free and fair elections, accountable governance, and respect for fundamental rights. His dedication to Bangladesh is evident, and we are honored to welcome him this morning. Ambassador Milam and Mr. Danilovich bring extraordinary experience in international diplomacy and governance. They have witnessed and influenced decades of American foreign policy in South Asia. They have stood with Bangladesh in its most challenging moments, one during the democratic transition of the early 1990s and the other during the 2007-8 emergency rule. Their perspective are crucial in helping us understand how Bangladesh-US relations have evolved and what the future may hold for a Bangladesh that is once again going through a democratic transition. By hearing from Ambassador Milam and Mr. Danilovich, we hope to gain insights into Bangladesh-US relations past, present, and future. This interactive discussion will allow us to explore different perspectives and engage directly with our esteemed guests. Before I conclude, I want to express my sincere gratitude to our distinguished speakers for joining us today. I also thank all of you in the audience, academics, diplomats, politicians, journalists, students, and concerned citizens for showing your commitment to democratic governance and international cooperation. The future of Bangladesh's democracy depends on all of us, and it is heartening to see such an engaged gathering here this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ambassador William B. Milam and Mr. John F. Danilovich. We are eager to hear your thoughts. Thank you. Let us begin the conversation. Thank you, Ambassador Milam and Mr. John. I would like to request you to start with your introductory speech, whatever you want to say, please. You can use the podium or you can speak from here. John first.
You want me to talk?
Yeah, sure. Just
Yeah, please, sure.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you all for coming. I'm quite, whoops. Thank you all for coming. It's amazing to see so many people turn out. And for two old, out-of-date diplomats, but in any case, it's very happy. I'm very happy, and John, I know, is happy to be here. You know, I was in Bangladesh 35 years ago, and it was an experience I treasure and remember quite clearly to this day. It was a very powerful learning experience for me, but also a great, I was witness to what I consider to be a great part of history, at least the history of South Asia, because I was here when the dictator Ershad was overthrown and taken down, and power was restored to civil society. The government was given to the civilians. by the Army, which since I was here and pretty cognizant of what was going on, I know that the Army was offered at least to help Irshad and turned it down. And that was his final day, actually. But what I learned from that experience was quite remarkable. It was that societies can turn around, can take care of changing from autocracies to democracies, and and I was really amazed that I was actually witness to one of the more remarkable examples of that knowledge. So, getting back to Bangladesh after all these years was a great pleasure for me. I've wanted to come back for a long time. As you probably know, I wrote a lot. After I retired from the diplomatic service, I basically became a journalist, like all of these journalists around here today, I guess, except I never had a big camera like that. So, in any case, I wrote a lot. I wrote in South Asian papers for the most part. I wrote primarily in a Pakistani paper, which is called the Friday Times, but then there were several other papers I wrote in, and quite often in the American press. And I was zeroed in on the experience I had when I was here and how it was going badly. And I wrote for many years. I continued to write about the progress or the lack of progress towards democracy that was happening here in Bangladesh. And in writing that, I made an enemy of the government in power, the one that has been just overthrown here, the party that has just been overthrown here. So I was unable to come back to see what was going on here after about 10 or 15 years ago. So I'm very happy to be back. I'm very happy to be able to talk to you. I'm very happy to see John, who came to work for me in 1990 and has worked for me 3 times and has risen above all that bad luck to really have a great career. So anyway, during the pandemic in 2020, when I was then and still am a senior scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center, which is a think tank, an American think tank supported by the U.S. government, by the way. But during the pandemic, we had very little to do, and everything was closed down. I'm sure it was everywhere. So I had a Bangladeshi with me, a good friend who's now in Mexico, by the way. But he suggested that since we had nothing else to do, we ought to form a nonprofit organization, which would and we decided that it should be focused on Bangladesh politics, and in particular the human rights problems in Bangladesh and the democracy problems in Bangladesh. So we did. We formed this little organization, 4 or 5 people, without much money, and we began to work on trying to educate the American government and the American people about Bangladesh, and particularly about the problems with democracy and human rights, which were going on here then. And and we built up an audience. We built up our reputation, and we actually managed to attract some donations from other human rights organizations. So we got pretty busy in doing that, and that has been the basic my basic what I've done, basically what I've done for a living for the last 4 or 5 years, actually. So I'm here now to see the fruits of the revolution you've had, to understand what's going on, to try and be of help where we can. And John has been with me, and he's the one who knows the most about Bangladesh anyway, because he's been here 3 times. But so let me stop there, because I've probably run out of time and bored everybody to death. But anyway, I want to repeat that coming here is a great thrill for me, because I haven't been able to for a long time. And particularly at this time when your future is still being determined politically, it's a great time to come and see what's going on and see if we can help. So I turn it back to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. What Ambassador Milam didn't tell that he didn't get visa to visit Bangladesh for the last couple of years. 10 years. For the last 10 years, he didn't get visa. John, it's your turn.
Great. Thank you very much for the kind invitation and the warm welcome. You know, it's an honor for me to share the stage with 2 individuals I greatly admire, and both of whom I've considered friends and mentors over the year. I have to confess it's a little intimidating being up here as well, looking in the audience, because I also see a lot of friends who I don't want to disappoint. I see my mentors, my gurus, who I also don't want to disappoint. I see a lot of collaborators who have worked with us in Right to Freedom. I see friends I've worked with in my diplomatic career. On International Women's Day, I'm happy to see so many women in the audience. And as an unabashed fan of the heroes who helped Bangladesh regain its freedom in July and August 2024, I'm so pleased to see so many members of Gen Z here today. So I hope we'll have a good conversation. Just in terms of introductory remarks, I want to tell you who I'm not and who Bill Milam is not. We are not representatives of the United States government. We both had wonderful careers in the United States government, but when we retired, we pursued our own interests. We keep in touch with our colleagues in the US government. We share our views with them publicly and privately, but we have no access to privileged information. What the US government is doing, what's happening at the US Embassy, what's happening at the State Department, what's happening in the White House, your guess is as good as mine. So when we come to talk about US policy, I'm happy to share my perspective as a witness to history and a participant in some of it in the past, but going forward, I will share my views as a private citizen. I'm also not a representative of the deep state, nor is Ambassador Bill Milam. Hillary Clinton did not send me here. George Soros did not send me here. The CIA did not send me here. Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny did not send me here. All of this disinformation that's being spread about Bangladesh and that's being spread about those who advocate for democracy and human rights says more about the people telling the lies than it says about those of us here in this room who want to help Bangladesh build a better future. What I hope we can do today is have a conversation, and again, this conversational style, I thank our hosts, and I thank the Center for Governance Studies and BIS for providing in this opportunity, and thank you all for coming, because this gives us an opportunity to speak person to person. We've been in Washington, we've been advocating on behalf of Bangladesh. We've drawn on the information that we have from our past experience, from the media, from contacts with friends. Again, as Bill mentioned, during the period prior to August 5th, we didn't have as much contact with our friends in Bangladesh as we would have liked. Not because they didn't want to speak with us and not because they didn't value their friendship with us, but they existed, and we knew that they existed in an environment where even friends were kept from talking to friends. I would always remember vividly when a friend from Bangladesh would visit Singapore or Thailand or the United Kingdom, and I would suddenly get a message from a foreign phone number, and having the person on the other end say, all of those things that I wanted to tell you over the past months, years, weeks, I wasn't able to tell you, but now that I have a glimpse, a glimmer of freedom under which I can speak, I can share with you my views. So this told me all I needed to know about what was happening in Bangladesh. So our organization, Right to Freedom, a small nonprofit, and I'd like to acknowledge as well a member of our board of directors, Syed Badr Alam Saiful in the back, who has been with us since the beginning. What we did is we thought we could tell truth when people in Bangladesh found it difficult to tell the truth. We provided a platform. We provided a platform for people from Bangladesh when they came to the United States, and we provided a virtual platform for people who were able to connect, recognizing that they couldn't do these events in person here in Dhaka, but they could participate in our events. Now, some courageous individuals and organizations, like BRAC CGS, was able to continue its work during that time. And I salute everyone who participated in those dialogues here under what I know were extraordinarily difficult conditions. So we're here to learn. We're here to reconnect with old friends, to meet new friends, to build these linkages, and to see how we as an organization and we as individuals who love this country and want the best for its people and know that the dreams of the people have not been fulfilled in the past, we want to contribute to the building of Bangladesh 2.0. So if you have ideas now or in the future about how we can be most helpful, please share those with us. So thank you again, Ziller.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Ambassador Milam. Ambassador Milam, you were in Bangladesh during the transition from military rule to democracy in the early 1990s. Mr. John, you played a key diplomatic role during the political crisis of 2007 and 2008. Based on your experiences, what were the most significant diplomatic challenges you faced in advocating for democracy and human rights during those days? How did the US balance its diplomatic engagement while standing up for democratic values? Ambassador Milam, please.
Well, I guess the most difficult things for me were to understand what was going on from almost the moment I got here, and to find the kinds of sources I needed for information, and also find the people that I thought were, I'm sorry, I should, sorry if I,
It's okay, fine.
yeah, anyway, and to find, I've lost track of what I was saying. I guess that the most difficult for me was to find the sources of information and also the people who I knew were going to give me the straight, absolutely straight story, so I could report faithfully to my government. That was my job as an ambassador, and tell them what was going on and why it was going on and so forth. During that time, I might add that this wasn't a difficulty, but it was a surprise that the government in power, the dictator, kept trying to get me on his side, to somehow take a stand, which I knew I couldn't do and I wouldn't do, because frankly, I was not, in my heart of hearts, I was not particularly faithful to a dictator. So anyway, that was probably, but the other thing I will say is that I learned an awful lot, not just about how Bangladesh works, but how diplomacy works in that kind of situation, and I think it helped me a great deal in later situations of similar kind. I think John ought to talk too.
Sure. Thank you very much. The first thing I would say is that the United States has been blessed over Bangladesh's history with a number of extraordinary U.S. ambassadors here. And again, I'm sure many of them are known to those in the room, or you know of them. One of my earliest mentors, who I met actually as a university student, was former U.S. Ambassador Howard Schaefer, again, who first taught me about Bangladesh. I had the honor and privilege of working with Ambassador Milam. But there have been any number of memorable, committed ambassadors, U.S. ambassadors to Bangladesh, Harry K. Thomas, of course, Ambassador Jim Moriarty, Dan Mozina, and our most recent ambassador, Peter Haas, for whom I have the utmost admiration. We're fortunate now that even though the United States doesn't have a confirmed ambassador, we have a very seasoned and experienced diplomat leading the embassy team. So I think in terms of the U.S., we've had a steady engagement over the years. Obviously, in 1971, the U.S. was on the wrong side. But I think since 1971, the U.S. has been guided by a consistent set of principles as we've approached the relationship between the U.S. and Bangladesh. Tactics and strategies change, but I don't think the overall goal changed. In fact, I've heard ambassador after ambassador articulate basically the same formulation of U.S. interests, and they and their teams went about trying to implement those. With regard to the specifics of the question, though, I have come to say in recent times that this is really, in my view, Bangladesh's fourth chance. Not only the opportunities that we've discussed already, but I put 1971 in that category as well. So this moment very much reminds me of those initial periods of hope and optimism following these dramatic changes. A consistent theme, in my view, has been the challenge of getting Bangladesh's political parties, when in government, to live up to the promises they make when they're not in government. Political parties have their own internal motivations. This is not unique to Bangladesh, but at times there need to be checks and balances and accountability mechanisms, both within government and outside. So I think if you look at U.S. engagement in Bangladesh and maybe the successes or relative failures, a lot of that has to do less with the political parties and what they did, but how effective those other institutions were that were charged with ensuring accountability. We've worked with many of those organizations around the years. We've done our best to support them at times, but ultimately it hasn't been a fair fight always between those forces that support democracy and human rights and those who seek to deny those rights to their fellow citizens. I know it's a difficult and a sensitive topic to talk about, but we can't ignore the reality that Bangladesh's armed forces, the Bangladesh Army, has played a critical role in the nation's history. There have been many positive contributions that the Bangladesh Army has made domestically and internationally. Its role in international peacekeeping, its role in disaster response, its role as the guardian and shield of the nation are ones that I greatly respect and admire. But if we're being honest, when it comes to Bangladesh's politics, the influence and the conduct of Bangladesh's army has not always been benign. So if I contrast the current period to previous periods, one of the characteristics that I look at is what the civil-military relationship is. And my view is that for democracy and human rights to flourish, civilian government, as messy and as difficult and as challenging and as limited as it may be, is ultimately the way forward for a country. You can't build a democracy through autocratic means. So that's my first point. And as I reflect on the U.S. role and U.S. engagement, I think perhaps we've lost sight of that. Not just here in Bangladesh, but in Pakistan, another country where Bill and I have both served. We've worked closely with other members of the international community, and I think that's been a consistent theme. The more that those of us in the international community who are like-minded work together, I think the better the chances are of democracy and human rights taking root here. That's not to say that there'll be unanimity. I know that some members of the international community have a different perspective, and those perspectives are valid from their standpoint. But we need to be very clear of who's on our side and who's on another side. The final point I would make, whether it comes to the United States or more broadly international engagement in Bangladesh, particularly with respect to democracy, is I fear that at times Bangladeshis and those who follow Bangladesh overstate the role of international actors. And then this leads to the various conspiracy theories that make the rounds among the chattering classes. Certainly the United States government and other governments have policy priorities, have values for which we stand, and we as diplomats do our best to advance U.S. objectives. I make no apologies for that. It has been consistently a value and a policy of the United States that democracy and human rights are critical to Bangladesh's social and economic development, and that a democratic, prosperous, and free Bangladesh will be a better partner for the United States. That was true in 1971, it was true in 1990, it was true in 2008, and it's true in 2024. People, though, think that that interest means that the U.S. is meddling in the internal affairs of Bangladesh, and that somehow we're orchestrating the events from outside. And at times, other countries are accused of doing the same. I think what this does is it robs the Bangladeshi people of agency. And I think that the best example of that is the events of July and August 2024. The revolution, if you call it that, or the uprising as some prefer, was something that was born in Bangladesh. It rose up in Bangladesh, and it came to fruition in Bangladesh. The people of Bangladesh, and the people of Bangladesh alone, deserve credit for the end of the previous dictatorship and this fourth opportunity for building new democracy. I think the role of the United States and others is to support those aspirations, to do what we can to help advance them, and to ensure that even as we pursue our own interests, which may at times be separate from Bangladesh's interests in other areas, that by our actions we do nothing to derail that democratic journey.
Ambassador Bill, during your tenure in Bangladesh, the country was transitioning to democracy after years of military rule. What was the most effective diplomatic tool in helping Bangladesh move forward a more open political system?
The most effective diplomatic tools? Oh. Well, I suppose a good ambassador, me, maybe, and a good foreign service officer like John are the most effective tools. Those who want to, make sure that whatever is happening in the right way and for the right people and so forth. So I can't think, I'll let John go ahead on this, so.
Thanks. So I think the first thing everyone should realize when it comes to U.S. policy, whether it be in Bangladesh or elsewhere, is that ambassadors and deputy chiefs of mission and vice consuls don't make policy. We implement policy and we inform policy. So policy decisions are made in Washington. So often observers will be critical of what an embassy is doing or saying. And my good friend Peter Haas was certain the victim of this. As Ambassador Milam indicated, all of us, of course, have our personal views, but in a professional diplomatic service, our job is to faithfully represent the policies and perspectives of our elected government, and we take that responsibility very seriously. Within our system, we have avenues for dissent. If there's a policy set in Washington and we disagree with it, certainly an ambassador, but even the most junior diplomat can express dissent. And our forefathers who served in the U.S. consulate in Dhaka in 1971, led by Archer K. Blood, did this to great credit and to universal acclaim. So we implement policy, but that policy needs to be well informed. And one of the dangers, I think, in the digital age is there's a lot of garbage out there in the air, whether it be in the formal media, of course not anyone in this room, but many media report things which simply are not true. And social media has made it so much easier for people to spread lies and disinformation. And Bangladesh, whether it knows it or not, right now is in the middle of an information war. And I'm sorry to tell you, you're losing that war. I don't worry that the White House or the State Department is going to fall for the lies being spread by the apologists for the previous dictator and their international supporters. They'll rely on the reporting from our embassy in Dhaka. I'm confident of that. But many other people, including people who have a voice in foreign policy formulation, may fall for those lies. So part of the role of diplomats and part of the role of embassy is to speak truth and to not make up disinformation to counter disinformation, but to speak the truth. So how do we do that? How does an embassy, how does a diplomat report faithfully to Washington? We talk to people, right? We're living here in this country, and I've always maintained that the moment a diplomat arrives in a country, they automatically know more than everyone in Washington. But we only know those things not because we sit in a big red fort in Gulshan and play tennis at an American club or read a newspaper. We do that because we get to know people. We have conversations like this and thousands of other conversations. And we need to have all sides and all perspectives. So again, you'll often hear that the US Embassy or a certain individual is biased towards a particular side because maybe somebody takes a snapshot of a moment in time and sees them sitting with a former minister of a certain government or representative of another. And then there's an aha moment that this embassy is an agent of this party. Again, nothing could be farther from the truth. I prided myself during my time here, and I know the same for Bill, that we engage with people from across Bangladesh's political spectrum, civil society, the business community, to learn as much as we could, to kind of check things against each other, because surprise, surprise, not everyone in Bangladesh agrees, not just on opinions, but on facts sometimes. So our role in what we did at the embassy was to try to gain the most accurate picture, report that to Washington, and give advice on how US policies could be formulated based on that information to achieve the goals for which we've set out.
John, during the 2007 and 2008 military-backed caretaker government period, we know that US diplomats played a critical role in behind-the-scenes discussions. Could you share some insights into how diplomats operate in such situations, and what is the role of track 2 diplomacy in managing relationship with both governments and civil society in politically sensitive environments?
Thanks. That's a great question. The best thing about being a former diplomat is that you can speak your mind, and you don't have to seek clearance from anyone. When I speak for Right to Freedom, our organization, of course, Ambassador Milam and I have to come to an agreement. But when I speak as myself, I can say whatever I want. And I've been speaking out and writing extensively about that period, the 2007 to 2008 period. And I've done it critically. Obviously, there are sensitive issues which are still private and can't be disclosed. And both Bill and I have a responsibility to protect that information and to protect the individuals who shared information with us. But broadly speaking, I'm the first to acknowledge that the United States made great mistakes in the 2007 to 2008 period. I don't believe that the United States, I wasn't here at the time on January 11th, but I don't believe that Ambassador Butenis or her colleagues were the ones who caused 1/11 to happen. I don't think there was some secret coffee group that made the decision and then instructed people in Bangladesh what to do. But obviously, at that time, there was a lot of concern being expressed by the US government about the direction in which things were heading. So during that 2007-2008 period, we shared the goal that I think the interim government had, and perhaps even the military and civil society had, that Bangladesh's democracy that had been promised in 1990 had gone off track, and there were fundamental reforms that needed to be made in order to get Bangladesh back on track. So where I give us credit is that we supported the reform agenda. We worked to support the caretaker government, including in times of need, like after a cyclone when the US provided relief assistance. We maintained contact with all sides, but we were limited in our understanding because of the situation. A lot of the people whose voices needed to be heard couldn't be heard because of that time. Again, I alluded earlier to the role of the Army. I think we, the United States government, and perhaps others, including some within Bangladesh, gave too much importance to what the generals and brigadiers thought and didn't give enough attention to what the people of Bangladesh wanted. We talked with people, we talked with civil society, we talked with political parties, we talked with the caretaker government, but maybe we listened too much to the Army. And I think that partially explains why perhaps things did not turn out the way we had hoped. The other mistake I think we made as an embassy and as a US government is we put too much emphasis on the elections and the election timeline. Elections are important. You can't have a government that isn't elected and has a mandate over the long term. An elected government has to also be committed to reforms for them to take root. But at that time, I think there were significant reforms that needed to take place. The caretaker government attempted to advance the reform agenda, but once it became clear that the priority was to simply hold elections and leave, they lost all of their leverage with the political parties. And the agreements that were reached with the political parties were done in secret. So we really don't know to this day what the former Prime Minister agreed to in her negotiations with the then caretaker government. We, at the time, the United States government, weren't party to them. Our perception was that at that time, the Awami League and Sheikh Hasina had learned their lessons, were committed to reforms, and would take forward the path that the caretaker government had set out. As history turned out, we were wrong in assuming that and in believing what we were being told. And then we saw the steady decline, which led us to the summer of 2024. So I think in many ways what the interim government is doing here is a reflection of lessons learned from the past. And I'm not here as an apologist or a defender of the interim government. Professor Yunus doesn't need my support, right? Professor Yunus has his own profile, and certainly those in the interim government are eminently capable of pursuing these reforms and fulfilling their mandate. But from what I've seen and from what I've heard, the way in which the government at this point is going about building the consensus on reform, engaging with the political parties, maintaining the primacy of civilian governance, even in an unusual situation of an interim government, I think that's all the right things. And in terms of the US, the final thing I would say is that while I was critical of some of the decisions the Biden administration took, particularly related to the January 2024 elections, I was very pleased with how the US government responded immediately after August 5th. Beginning with the United Nations General Assembly and through the fall, the United States very openly, publicly, and demonstrably demonstrated its support for the reform agenda, understanding the importance of elections, but not getting involved in setting an arbitrary date. So as the decisions have evolved, they've been decisions that Bangladeshis owned, and I think that's what's most critical. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit further about what's going to happen in the Trump administration, but I'm a big believer that we have to learn from the past to do our best in the future.
Bill, in the past, the U.S. has been accused of prioritizing prioritizing geopolitical interests over democracy, whether in its engagement with Bangladesh or the broader South Asian region. Given China's rising influence and the evolving Indo-Pacific strategy, do you think the U.S. Will continue to focus on democracy and human rights in Bangladesh, or will strategic interests take precedence once again?
I want to say something else
Sure.
first. I want to say that John is much more of an expert on things that have happened in the more recent past than I am, because you must remember that I served here in 35 years ago and really loved the place and saw at that time a miraculous change of government and a switch towards democracy that didn't work. John has seen 2 or 3 others of those since then, and he knows more about that, most of those, that I do. So I think he's absolutely right from what I know in his estimations about that 2007 and 8 situation. The question about what the U.S. government is going to do in the future is a question that I was hoping you wouldn't ask, because frankly, I don't know. This is a totally new government. It's new to the Americans as well as it's new to everybody else. I think that there are certain signs you can see of what is important to the government. What's important is, I guess, what I would call transactional diplomacy, as opposed to other kinds of diplomacy. So there will be a transactional twist to probably everything that happens, but it's really hard to say, from my view, what is going to happen and what the U.S. government's going to be like. And you must remember that this new government is really set off on a totally different plane, but it will be answerable over time to the Congress, to the American people in elections that come up. And so it's whether or not its direction that it's taken rather, I think, seriously, will change back or be moderated in some way. Moderate's not quite the right word I wanted, but be changed in some way, or whether it's going to be able to carry out its whole agenda seems totally is a totally unknown question, at least to me right now. You know, what the government wanted to do was actually available to the American voter long before the election. There was this, I don't know, you may not have heard of it, but there was a paper written by academics, really, in the States, and came out of a conservative organization, the name of which I'm forgetting at the moment. Huh?
Heritage?
The Heritage Foundation, that's right, yeah. Which is a foundation that has been, had people in government before, but never had really that much influence as much influence as it has today in the government. And that agenda was called Project 2025. And it set out all the things in general that, and it's about 1,000 pages long. Believe me, I haven't read it, but I know it's about 1,000 pages long, and it talks about economics. It talks about the taxes that are going to be the trade issues and the what do they call those? What?
The tariffs?
Yeah. What is it?
Tariffs?
Tariffs. I was forgetting the word. And it talks about all the other issues that the Republicans find that they want to change the direction of the United States, and have so far taken actions to do that in many ways, but whether that will remain, I don't know. I really don't.
I can take.
So I'm gonna
Oh,
go.
sorry. Go ahead, no, please, sorry.
Well, I know you want to interrupt me, and I don't blame you. Go ahead.
No, I can take that question. And, I'm not a political science, I'm not an academic. I'm a practitioner of diplomacy and a student of history, and maybe a student of political science, but I'm certainly not a distinguished professor like others in the room who I won't name. But let me give you my perspective. When it comes to U.S. foreign policy formulation and implementation, it never occurs in a vacuum. There's a domestic context and an international context. And I think if you look at previous periods in U.S.-Bangladesh relations, you have to start with the international context and the domestic context. In 1971, that context was the Cold War and the U.S. war in Vietnam and the Nixon administration's domestic priorities. In the period of 1990, it was the end of the Cold War was the context. The conflict in the Middle East with Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, and the Bush administration's domestic agenda. If you look at the context in 2007, 2008, the context was clearly the war on terror, the U.S. engagement in Afghanistan, and the U.S. war in Iraq. That informed U.S. policy. And I think now you have to look at U.S. policy in the context of the dramatic changes taking place in the United States, the disruption that's occurring within our political system and institutions, and internationally with a period of conflict in the Middle East and in Russia and Ukraine, elsewhere in the world, and the rise of China and a conflict between the United States and China, both in the soft power realm and in the economic realm, and hopefully never in the security realm. So that's the context in which these decisions are made. But that said, I don't think the decisions are made solely for those reasons, but you have to understand that they're there as well. So I agree with those who criticize past U.S. policy that the international or the geopolitical component played too much of a role and ultimately undermined the U.S.'s ability to achieve some of its other objectives. The U.S. talks with other countries all the time about a lot of things. So the U.S. discusses Bangladesh with a lot of countries, including some in the region and some outside the region who have interests here. At the end of the day, though, my belief is that the U.S. should primarily focus on U.S. interests and U.S. objectives and should look and interact with countries based more on what's specific to that country rather than losing focus and prioritizing something external to the country. The policy, the stated policy of the Trump administration is America first. This comes across as a radical departure from the past, but for me it's actually just a way of reframing things, because at the end of the day, I think every country pursues a name of country first policy. I hope that Bangladesh today and tomorrow pursues a Bangladesh first policy. It's important in any kind of relationship that you understand what the other party's interests and goals are. When you're at home, when you're dealing with family members, you need to understand what they want, what their needs are as you interact with them. The same in friendships, the same in business relationships, the same in every field. So you need to have that understanding. But it doesn't mean that you pursue something solely selfishly at the expense of others. You ideally want to have a win-win. So I think part of this is how it's framed. So when it comes to US and Bangladesh relations, I think the challenge for the government and people of Bangladesh and those who are outside Bangladesh but hope to have strong Bangladesh-US relationships is to understand how to reconcile Bangladesh's interests, Bangladesh first, and America first. And when it comes to democracy and human rights, I think this is the easiest thing in the world to do. I do not see any US interest that is served by an autocratic, despotic, kleptocratic regime. That's a false choice. Those who've argued in the past that for stability, you need to have an autocratic government and ignore human rights abuses and ignore democracy being denied, again, I think that they're serving their own interest. Autocrats like the world to be filled with other autocrats. So when I hear somebody like a leader of a country that does not have elections, that does not respect human rights, be nostalgic for the days when Bangladesh was also ruled by a leader who was not interested in what was in the best interest of her people and who was interested in perpetuating her own and her inner circle's rule, I understand what the game is. They don't want the light to be shown on them, and they're worried about how their own populations will react. From the United States perspective, I think a strong, prosperous, democratic Bangladesh that respects human rights and advances prosperity is a better friend and partner for the United States. I think it's a model in the Indo-Pacific for others to emulate. And as there's a competition in the Indo-Pacific between a Chinese model and an American or Western model, I think Bangladesh, just by the success of this experiment, does more than 1,000 military bases on St. Martin's Island would ever do to advance US objectives in the Indo-Pacific region.
Bill, looking at Bangladesh today, with its recent mass uprising and the push for democratic reforms, what lessons from the past should policymakers, citizens, and activists take to ensure a more stable and democratic future? Based on your experience, what are Bangladesh's most significant risks and opportunities in this new political era?
Sorry, I missed the question.
So, looking at Bangladesh today,
Yeah.
with its mass uprising, recent mass uprising, and the push for democratic reforms, what lessons from the past should policymakers, activists, citizens, civil society take to ensure a more stable and democratic future? Based on your experience, please go ahead. And what are the most
Well,
significant risks and opportunities for Bangladesh?
I think the answer to that is pretty clear. You figure out why things went wrong to the extent you can in the past, and try not to make the same mistakes in the future. That's kind of a truism. Anybody can say that, and it doesn't really say much. But the thing is that in Bangladesh, we know what the problems have been, and the problems have been that in each case where a democracy seemed to be possible, there were forces that didn't seem to believe in democracy and were able to move the country in a non-democratic way. So, when you come to, in the situation you're in now, in Bangladesh, you're going to have now how to replace a government with a new government that is primed and certain to go towards the democratic path. And that democratic path is pretty easy to figure out. It's one where the people are ultimately always in charge, isn't it? because I think we all know that it's in a democracy, power comes ultimately from the people. But in fact, that seems to have always been subverted in Bangladesh in ways that I'm not sure I understand, but your historians, your political scientists, your economists, I like to put in my own profession, will be able to explain why things went wrong, or why they think things went wrong, and what can be done to change it. You're in a perfect situation now, because here you've got an interim government, a leader whom I know quite well, and and I've talked to, and I think is really wants to move towards democracy, and he wants the Bangladesh, the system to develop with the approval of the people. So it's always a kind of a democratic system. So that's, I think, what you do. You look for how to find the flaws and then try to correct them. And that's a pretty simple kind of advice, but it's the only advice I can think of.
Thank you, thank you. John, over the years, the US has supported Bangladesh through civil society engagement, governance programs, and diplomatic advocacy. Given the changing global order and shifting priorities in Washington, D.C., do you see US support for democratic governance and human rights in Bangladesh increasing, decreasing, or changing in nature?
Thanks. And to go back to the previous question, you've teed up what I was going to say, which is the risk is that the accountability mechanisms won't be strong enough to counter perhaps the tendencies of some to want to return to business as usual. So then the question comes, how does Bangladesh and how do Bangladesh's friends and well-wishers strengthen those instruments of accountability and strengthen the reform process begun by this government? I think it's clear from what's happening in the United States and what's happening in Europe that the role of development partners in providing funding, at least, to support these initiatives is going to change. I hope that change is gradual and not dramatic as it has been. I hope the United States government, for example, rethinks some of the decisions it's made regarding foreign assistance once it becomes clear that those changes aren't necessarily in the United States' interest. But regardless of whether that happens, there needs to be a strong civil society in Bangladesh. There need to be strong independent institutions, commissions, etc., to hold the political parties accountable. So how do you do that? How do you mobilize resources? There are domestic resources that can be mobilized from the private sector. and these certainly need to come to the fore. You know, one interesting idea that I've talked about with some people is that if the government of Bangladesh is able to recover some of the money that was stolen over the past 17 years, whether through formal legal channels or as part of plea bargains, perhaps, and voluntary restitution from some of those guilty of crimes, perhaps some of that money could be set aside to support these accountability mechanisms to ensure that what has happened in the past won't happen again. The other ally, I think, beyond international civil society, is the Bangladeshi diaspora community. For many years, I think the Bangladeshi diaspora community did not live up to its potential in the role that it could play in helping to build a new Bangladesh. Too often, activism by Bangladeshis abroad was also centered on the political parties from Bangladesh and their overseas wings. People have freedom of association. If people in the United States or elsewhere want to group together with others who share a political view and they want to act on that, that's fine. I'm not going to stop them from doing that, and I don't think they should be stopped. But the way to influence policy in other countries is to engage in that country's political process. The other thing I would say is that in my years of following Bangladesh and in very recent times, and particularly during the July and August uprising, there were members of the Bangladeshi diaspora community in the United States and around the world who fully supported the changes here and had those aspirations, shared the aspirations of their fellow countrymen. Many, for understandable reasons, had not been able to return to Bangladesh during that period. they continue to want to help to build Bangladesh 2.0. I think it's up to you and them, not me, to figure out how they can do that, how they can best contribute their talent, their expertise. Some will come back here permanently or temporarily to help out in their areas of expertise. Some will establish business partnerships, institutional linkages. Some will provide financial support as they're able to for humanitarian development or the political, and I use that term broadly, reasons. I think that is a powerful force. And again, the private sector here in Bangladesh. You know, Bangladeshis are very generous and charitable people. And I know everyone with the ability to do so has their own ways of dispensing charity. And all of these are worthy goals, but perhaps Bangladeshi society, Bangladesh's business community, can also think about how they might be able to use the resources at their disposal to help those institutions. Two other things I'll mention: the critical role of the press and the media. For too long, some in the media, you know, did what was necessary to advance their own narrow interests and not necessarily the nation's interests. So the media also has to be held accountable now and into the future. There's opportunities now for citizen journalists to share their views, whether it be through online platforms or other means. So it's not just the traditional media. The final thing I would say, and I think this is the most important thing, so if you leave today remembering nothing that I said, please remember this. The key for me to Bangladesh's future is harnessing the energy, the patriotism, the courage, and the commitment of Gen Z. They were the ones who were at the vanguard of the revolution. Many others participated. The credit for what happened belongs to the Bangladeshi people as a whole, not just that narrow group that started it. But without that catalyst, without their role, the events of July and August wouldn't have happened. Now they have a role to play in building a new Bangladesh, and that can happen in many ways. It can happen through the political system, it will happen in business, it will happen in the professions, and I hope it will happen in civil society as well. The opportunity for renewal and regeneration of institutions is harnessing these young individuals and giving them a way to participate in building this country. For many of them, the most significant thing that has ever happened or will happen in their lives happened in July and August of 2024. That needs to be acknowledged, and they need to be invited to help play a role in building Bangladesh going forward, and they can't be pushed aside.
And another question for you, that U.S. support for the human rights, democracy, and for many other issues. So do you think that Washington support for democratic governance and human rights in Bangladesh increasing in future or decreasing? Or
so the Trump administration is still formulating its specific policy towards Bangladesh. It stated some broad priorities. And it's no secret that when the Trump administration thus far has articulated its priorities, promotion of democracy and human rights has not been there at the top of the list. We'll see how that evolves over time when it comes to specific policies. But I think it would be prudent to plan for a future in which the U.S., at least the administration, the executive branch, de-emphasized formally the importance of democracy and human rights and support thereof. Now, that doesn't mean the U.S. will switch and instead of supporting democracy and human rights, the U.S. policy will be support dictators and kleptocrats and human rights abusers. I don't think there's any risk of that happening. So it's not that the U.S. is joining the other team, but maybe the U.S. officially will take a timeout. The game will continue, but the U.S. From the executive branch will be on the sidelines. But the United States is more than just the executive branch of the government. You know, the United States is more than just the president, the State Department, and executive agencies. The Congress has and will continue to have an important voice. And there are members of Congress who care deeply about Bangladesh, care deeply about democracy and human rights, and they'll continue to advocate. And within our system, I'm sure they'll continue to try to provide support, tangible support to those working to advance democracy and human rights. American civil society, the human rights groups, and other advocacy groups will continue to work, continue to focus on Bangladesh, and continue to partner. And as I said, the American people at large. The U.S. business community, obviously their primary role is to advance their economic and commercial interests and build prosperity on both sides. But there are elements of governance which are important to the business community as well. Transparency, rule of law, anti-corruption. These are things that U.S. businesses want to see, not just because they're good things, but because it makes it easier for them to do business, and it makes them more competitive than their rivals from other countries who don't share those same concerns. And as an American investor, a company will want to make sure that a court is independent and will rule based on the merits, not because somebody has influenced the decision of the judges. So I think if we think broadly about democracy, human rights, and governance, and we think broadly about the United States, then I don't think there's as much to worry about as if one were only focused on the sole manifestation of U.S. support for democracy and human rights is how big of a check USAID writes and gives to its partners.
Thank you. Sure, please.
I meant to say this, I think, in my last answer, but I didn't get to it. You know, the Trump administration is a remarkably different change in U.S. posture and policies. We don't totally, at least I, don't totally understand exactly how it's going to be because it's so new. And right now, there's so much rambunctiousness, if you will, that it's hard to figure out what's the, separate the wheat from the chaff, in the sense that they're doing things just to demonstrate they can do them, will not be, will not be part of the long-term foreign policies of the Trump government or governments that follow. And John's mention of America First was what reminded me of this, because America First, we've seen an America First government, or at least movement in the U.S. Before that. There was a strong America First movement. It was never elected to anything. In 1939 and 40, 1938, 1941 maybe even, when the Second World War was seen to be approaching. It had already started by 1939, and it's hard to describe it. It was a failure. It was a failed policy because it didn't meet the needs, American foreign policy needs of the time, let alone of the future. And so, the United States became quite different, and the America First policy just fell out completely when the war started. Now, what I'm saying is that John is absolutely right about all the generalizations he's making about how Americans work and feel and do things, and how American society works, so that things are likely to trend back towards a kind of American view of the world, or maybe a more traditional American view of the world. But we don't know that yet for sure. And I'm at the point where I think that it's a little early to start predicting what is specifically likely in the foreign policy of this government. But I'm sure that it will be it will be based upon some philosophical, intellectual structure that gives them the kind of conservative government and behavior that they think necessary, and will fulfill their policy objectives. And so, but I'm still waiting for those to develop. In the meantime, as John mentioned, and as I think I mentioned, there's always what's going to happen in the Congress, what's going to happen in the elections that come up. There's there are singular elections, and then there's a midterm election. So I think there could be great changes in policy in the next few years, and we're going to have to just go with the flow, I think, and not, we can't really tell you I can't at least really tell you what to prepare for, but just be prepared and try to understand as their policy changes, as the government's policy changes because of these changes, because of these things that I mentioned, Congress and the elections and other things, be prepared for changes in foreign policy. And that's what I think the only mistake that can be made is to think that there won't be any changes and that policy is going to be the same as it always was, because that is certainly not true.
John, the recent political movements in Bangladesh have mainly been youth-driven. All of us are supported by civil society organizations. Of course, the opposition political parties had a big role. From your experiences, what role do young people and civil society play in strengthening democracy? How can Bangladesh leverage in its young population to build a more inclusive and democratic future?
Sure, thanks. And I'm conscious of the history. I mean, students have played again a vanguard role in Bangladesh's history throughout. So in that ways, perhaps it's nothing new. But certainly, again, as I've stated before, the events of July and August would not have occurred had the students not played that vanguard role, had they not mobilized society. And while I acknowledge the contributions of the political parties as part of the ultimate mass movement, we also have to face the facts that the political parties in the opposition tried for much of the past or the previous 17 years to force the previous regime to either step down or to agree to hold democratic elections, and they were consistently unable to do so. So to me, that says something about Bangladeshi society, and it says something about the importance of the people as opposed to the importance of the political parties. So if you look at the demographics of Bangladesh, this Gen Z cohort, not only did it play this critical role at this time, but that Gen Z cohort will continue to determine or influence Bangladeshi society, business, culture, politics, etc., going forward. They're an amazing generation. We had the opportunity to speak with some members of Gen Z, some of those who've been involved in the movement, who are now looking at taking on perhaps a more overt political role. And I was blown away by their understanding of the situation, their analysis, the level of thought that had gone into it, and the plans that they have. I think they're realistic, and I think students in general are realistic that in a political competition, the other established parties have huge organizational and institutional advantages. So I don't think the role of the students should be determined or defined by how many votes or seats, for example, a student-led party gains in the next election. I think it's incumbent on everyone, on every institution, to support young people in this generation. And I'm as guilty, I'm as guilty as the next person of maybe putting too much emphasis on experience and age. So as I've aged and I value my experience, I'm also very conscious of the need to provide space for younger people to come up and to replace us. The United States Foreign Service is a unique institution in the United States and the world. And one of our greatest strengths is that we have a career, but at a certain point, no matter how successful an ambassador is, like Ambassador Milam, no matter how much I've enjoyed my career, at a certain point, my time ends. I move on, I continue to contribute in other ways, but I make room for others to come forward. So I can go to the U.S. Embassy now. I can see myself in the eyes of the younger officers. I can see myself in people at the mid-levels, and I'm confident that this generation that's come is as capable or if not more than I was. I'm not looking at that saying I should be there because I know better than this person or that person. I had my time, I made my contribution, I played my role. Now I've moved aside and others have stepped forward. I'm contributing in other ways now. Part of what it's incumbent on us to do, us of the older generations, is to provide guidance, experience to those who come after us. We prepare them, and then we make way for them. So my advice for Bangladesh is to approach things similarly. Take advantage of the experience of our elders, make room and prepare for those who will come after us, and ultimately that's what I think allows us to have a legacy and to leave the world better than we found it.
Bill, both of you have worked in countries undergoing democratic transitions. Are there lessons from other countries that might be relevant to Bangladesh today? And what factors determine whether a democratic transition is successful or short-lived?
Lessons from when?
Other countries.
Sorry?
Other countries.
Other countries. Oh, that's a good question. It's hard to answer. I think I'll pick up from where John left off, in the sense that Bangladesh could and should probably keep a close eye on the rest of the world, because other countries are also running into the same problems it is, or will run into the same problems, whether they be political problems of the advancement towards democracy, the ability of democracy to weather the storms that go against it, or economic problems that they will have run into, because everybody runs into these trade and financial problems, and countries might and will handle them differently according to their abilities, their specialities, and the way their economies are structured and the way their societies are structured. But they will have to make changes. Everybody has to make changes as we go along. And I think as far as other countries go, they should watch the other developing countries, the kind of countries that are kind of like Bangladesh, and see where you might find success. Some of them might find success, some of them may find non-success. And that's the only thing I can say. Yeah, there has to be lessons to be learned, but I can't tell you which countries will learn them and which won't. But certainly that will happen.
Thank you, Bill. John, this is my last question to you. If you had to make a prediction, what would you think Bangladesh-US relations would look like 5 years from now? And what steps should both countries take to strengthen their partnership to benefit democracy and mutual interests?
Yeah. Well, by nature, I'm an optimist. But I think in this case, the optimism is grounded in some overall realities and trends. I think the overall prospects for the U.S.-Bangladesh relationship are very positive. Again, I wrote about this a little bit when the Trump administration was first coming to office, and there was a lot of doom and gloom. People thought the world would end on January 20th. And some people were actively propagating that, and maybe that hope/belief that President Trump would come in and there'd be a dramatic change and, the clock would turn back instead of going forward. And that, of course, did not happen. The Bangladesh-U.S. relationship is very different today than it was, when I was here in 1990 or in my subsequent tours. And again, back to the U.S. aid freeze and possibly, cuts in some areas. I mean, obviously this will have an impact, and I don't want to in any way diminish the impact on the lives of those directly affected, whether it be the beneficiaries of those assistance programs or the partners and friends with whom we implemented projects. I know people have lost their jobs, their lives have been upended. There's real humanitarian concerns, particularly when it comes to the humanitarian programs where people face the possibility of starvation or disease because life-saving assistance from the United States may not be provided in the future, and others may not yet be ready to step up and fill that void. So the U.S.-Bangladesh Development Partnership has been a centerpiece of the relationship. I think it's done a lot of good, but I think that's the part that's most likely to change. And I think that change probably is a trend that will continue, mainly because of the economic conditions in the United States and the rethinking about America's role in the world. So that's the reality from that end. From Bangladesh's end, the good news is that the perception of Bangladesh that all that matters is how much development assistance comes from the US or others misses the truth of the reality of Bangladesh, the thriving private sector. If you gave me the choice of more US aid or more garments exports, I know which I would choose, and I bet everyone in this room would do the same. Again, I mentioned the diaspora. Remittances from Bangladeshis living and working in the United States back to Bangladesh are far more significant than the US development assistance. Partnerships between US and Bangladesh private sector to look at how Bangladesh can expand beyond the garment sector. Cooperation, whether it be in fields of energy, infrastructure, there's a lot of potential. And as part of an Indo-Pacific community, I think there's a lot of opportunity for Bangladesh to take advantage of its geographic position, take advantage of its people, and build that part. The final thing, though, I would say, maybe 5 years is too short, but if you look beyond that, there are forces that are going to change the world that we can't even imagine. The tremendous changes in the IT area, what artificial intelligence means. I'm a grandfather now of 2 grandchildren and 1 more on the way. And that's the most important thing I do in my life. Far more important than the work I do with Right to Freedom is the time I spend with my grandchildren. And I think a lot about the world that they're going to inherit. And I do my best to prepare them for that, as I had done with my children. But I have no idea what the future is going to look like. In many ways, though, Bangladesh's core, I think, characteristic is resiliency. Time and again, the people of Bangladesh have shown that whatever the world, throws at them, they'll deal with it, they'll be resilient, and they'll rebound, and they'll move forward. So I hope that Bangladeshis and the United States and people who work on our relationship keep that in mind, that there are big changes coming, and we can redefine the relationship. There's lots of talent. Again, Bangladeshi talent is worldwide, world-class talent. And we see that in the many people here in Bangladesh and members of the diaspora around the world who are leaders in their field. We need to harness that. We need to take advantage of that. We need to turn everyone who's working for that better future into part of the team as we build this U.S.-Bangladesh relationship. So fundamentally, I'm optimistic.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Now I'm going to open the floor for Q&A session. Please raise your hands. When I give you the floor, please state your name and affiliation before asking a question. Please keep it to one question only. You may also mention which speaker your question is dedicated to. And I'll take 4 or 5 questions. In first round, John and Bill, you can take the note, please.
Thank you. I have a question for John. And you talked about the misinformation, disinformation going on against Bangladesh. And there is a campaign in the US and other Western countries that there is genocide going on against certain communities of Bangladeshis. And so what can we do? Could you suggest some measures that could be taken to counter that? Thank you.
We have with us Professor Ali Riyaz, who is the chairman of the Constitution Reforms Commission and the vice chair of the National Consensus Commission. Would like to hear from you, Professor Riyaz.
Thank you, Zilur. This is a great opportunity to see friends again. And over the last couple of months, I've been too much stuck in my work. But I don't have a question at that point. I just want to thank Center for Governance Studies for organizing, and I take this opportunity to thank Ambassador Milam and Jon for what they did over the last, their role have been significant in making Bangladesh visible in the international arena, particularly during an autocratic regime, and I call that a personalistic autocracy. I take this opportunity to thank you both, and I hope you would continue to play the role, as I know you would, in terms of right to freedom. And so, again, Bill, I know over the last decade you couldn't come to this country. Welcome. I hope you would be visiting Bangladesh quite frequently. And John, welcome to Dhaka. and we would like to see your continued effort going forward, because it is a very critical time, and this is a transition moment. Mistakes can be made, but most importantly, the opportunities are here. The prospect of a democratic Bangladesh is here. Let's take this opportunity. We are friends. Let's work together. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Ambassador Munshi Fawaz Ahmed, please.
Thank you very much, Zillur. It's a great opportunity.
Former Bangladesh ambassador to China.
Well, yeah, I'm Munshi Fawaz Ahmad, former ambassador of Bangladesh to China. It's a great pleasure an honor to see such great people like William B. Milam, ambassador, and also John Danilovitz, speaking to us about lots of things, and mostly about the US and Bangladesh and how we can take our relations forward. So I want to be a little provocative here. Please bear with me. I think that countries and peoples, no country is better than another country. All countries have their own areas of excellence and areas of lacking. And the people of the country decide how they move forward. There are exchanges of views and experiences and lessons learned, but no other country from outside can tell another people of other country that this is how you must do it. People in the country decide. So on that basis, there are two things that I want to ask. One is, how qualified is the USA in advocating democracy and human rights in countries like Bangladesh, while they're not doing the same in other countries? They help autocrats in other countries, and on the basis of their own perceived interests. And they help countries that actually understand.
Question, please.
No, this is part of the question.
Yeah, I do understand, but
Like Palestine, where there's a huge slaughter going on, and the Americans are siding with the slaughter. So how does it justify them in, trying to suggest that other countries follow democracy and human rights? There's another thing that I want to mention in this same breath, that is about that the United States, being the most powerful country in the world, has been involved in large number of conflicts since the Korean War. But has it successfully concluded any of those wars, except perhaps the first Gulf War? I don't know. I'm asking. So everywhere they have gone and either they have started the conflict or they have got involved in the conflict and they have messed things up. And then they fled from Afghanistan, and everywhere else they left things in a mess. Do you agree? Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Mohammad Shafiullah. I'll come to you.
If you want, you can have that one.
Ambassador Shafiullah, a member of the CGS. Ambassador Milam witnessed 1990, the transition from authoritarian to democratic system. And the three political parties agreed to certain principles to implement, to usher in democratic countries set up in Bangladesh without reference to the people of Bangladesh. Only the three political parties allies. Okay. Now, after 35 years, we are back to the same system. We proposed a set of reforms, because these reforms was promised in 1990, was not done by the political parties. Now we are back to similar situation. The sixth committee now will talk to the political parties, and if they agree on a minimum program, then the election will be held in December. If they don't want, if they want more, then there will be next year. Now, again, without reference to the people of Bangladesh, who is sovereign in this country? The political parties have no mandate because there's no election for so many years. So they don't have any mandate. Anyone could be a political party now because, no mandate. He can claim like 1,000 of people. Now, only sovereign is the people of Bangladesh. So I said before also in a CGS seminar that the reforms, whatever, the minimum reforms must be carried out and it must be approved in a referendum by the people of Bangladesh. Because they are the sovereign.
Question, please.
And they, would you like this idea? Number two is this, the democracy in Bangladesh is not only within the system not working. This another point is the external influence in Bangladesh. Our neighboring country interferes in every elections in Bangladesh. They want to set up their own person or political party in power, and they continue in spite of the genocide, which has been recorded by the Human Rights Commission that recently, that a country who claimed to be largest democracy in the world is sheltering a person and her colleagues who carried genocide in Bangladesh and who have worst violation of the Human Rights Commission. Now, whether anything can be done about that country or that person who is sheltering such a criminal person. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Chandrakant, please. I'll come to you, please. Later.
Thank you. Look, I'm a student of policy, public policy and development. I can't have a question before a statement. I really have to. It's
Make it.
Yeah, I'll make it as short as possible. It's about the development aid and, that sort of thing. USAID has come into the discussion here. I think, from my experience of 40 years in the development field, the basic fundamental problem with USAID, as opposed to the multilateral donors here, is the lack of transparency and accountability. And I'll tell you what, if you go to ERD, the Economic Relations Division of the government here, you can find a yearly statistics of all the donors and all the funds that are coming in here. But with USAID, it's a zero. You don't see any funding recorded there. And this has been common everywhere, and that really leads to questions, mistrust and distrust in terms of what is the USAID money being used for in the name of democracy, quote unquote, in the name of transparency, accountability, and what else. I'm not saying they have done bad things. They've done excellent things in health, education, and many other things. But that sort of accountability, lack of transparency. So can you do something about these sort of things? Not just in Bangladesh, it's quite common everywhere. And I think, when you talk about the dynamics of, the navigating the dynamics relations between USA and Bangladesh, it's just not the political issues in terms of aligning the political or the democratic values between the two countries. It's also about the development, aligning the development values, the practices, accountability and transparency. So I didn't have a question, but it's a question also with the statement. Thank you.
Can I start
John,
answering?
please.
So I'm happy to say that I have answers to all the questions. So on the first question about disinformation, to me there's nothing more ridiculous than the idea that Professor Muhammad Yunus is a genocidal tyrant who is committed to turning Bangladesh into an Islamist state where minorities are not welcome. So the truth is easy to find and the facts are easy to find. The problem is reach. There's a global information war underway and it's David versus Goliath. Bangladeshis are on Facebook. They talk to each other and they talk a lot on Facebook, and most of that conversation is in Bangla. People talk to each other around the world on X, former Twitter, and Bangladeshis are just not present on X. So when it comes to a piece of disinformation, the other day there was a piece of disinformation about an alleged gender violence incident, which some account from a neighboring country with over 100,000 followers posted a video. Within a day's time, they had over 500,000 people had seen that. Then a dedicated serious individual here who does fact-checking, pointed out that that video that had been showed was in an entirely different context. It was years old and had nothing to do with the current situation. The person who put out that correction has a couple thousand followers, and his post had a couple thousand views. So there are a lot of us well-meaning friends of Bangladesh who voluntarily tried to counter that, but we're outnumbered, we're outgunned. So somehow, Bangladeshis need to organize better, they need to have a bigger presence, there needs to be communication, coordination, so that those lies can be countered with truth. There may be a role for the Bangladesh government to play, there may be a role for the private sector, and there may be a role for Bangladesh's friends around the world. So that's the first part, and thanks for bringing that up. I'm glad that Professor Ali Riaz did not ask me a question, because I don't think there's any way I could have given an adequate answer. But I thank him for his friendship and mentorship, and he's not only been a gifted political scientist, but he's also been a political prophet. So if you wanted to know what was going to happen in Bangladesh over the years, all you had to do is read some of his latest writing or his latest books, and you would have seen there very clearly how things were going to go. And I can't be happier for Bangladesh than the fact that he came back here to play a critical role. My only complaint is it means we get to see each other less. For the ambassador's question about a number of things critical of the United States, again, I can answer this being in a position to not have to defend every action the United States has taken around the world. As a citizen of the United States, I have my own personal views, and I agree that many of the U.S. actions around the world over history have been mistaken, and I wish we had done something different. But I also know there's a lot of good the United States has done around the world. The United States advances American interests. There's nothing wrong with that. Each country is different. We have professional diplomats in our embassies and in the State Department, and we come up with policies and recommendations to best advance U.S. interests. Each country is different. It would be stupid to think that the U.S. policy towards Bangladesh would be the same as the U.S. policy towards Germany, the same policy as the U.S. would have to South Sudan, the same policy the United States would have to Martinique. Every country is individual and every country is different. There's the idea of how do we advance our goal, and then there are the tactics and the strategies. So I find it a little bit naive to think that just because the U.S. does or says something in one context, that means we automatically have to do or say the same in another country. That's not what professionals do. Professionals look at a situation, come up with the best plan, and execute. And when there's a mistake, we correct our mistake. So when it comes to Bangladesh, I've been very open and critical where I think we've made mistakes. My hope and expectation is that we'll learn from the past and we'll implement policies that will be more effective. And I'm happy sometime to talk about the rest of the world, but I'm here mainly to talk about Bangladesh. In regards to the question about a referendum, I'm on record publicly saying that I thought personally at some point in this transition process a referendum could have been helpful. I do believe ultimate sovereignty lies with the people, and I think the people's will should be supreme. There's a saying in Latin, vox populi, vox Dei. The voice of the people is the voice of God. The political parties, to some extent, represent the views of their people, but that doesn't mean it's everybody. I understand there's lots of practical and other reasons why a referendum may not have been the right choice in this situation, but to the extent that it matters, I was supportive of that idea. As far as India's policy towards Bangladesh, from my perspective, India can do what it wants to do. I'm not here to tell India what to do. But again, I'm a student of history, and there's a great book by a woman, an author, historian named Barbara Tuchman, which is called The March of Folly. And in that, she outlines a series of historical case studies in which states acted against their own self-interest. One of the prime examples she cites in that is the U.S. engagement in Vietnam. According to Barbara Tuchman, a view with which I agree, the U.S. policy in Vietnam over a 2-decade-plus period did not advance U.S. interests. It was a mistake. My own personal view is the U.S. war in Iraq is a similar example of a state, the United States, acting ultimately against its own self-interest. The world and the United States have been much better off had the United States not invaded Iraq. People will raise that with me and think that it's a gotcha moment, that they'll put me in a position of having to defend the indefensible. I'm at liberty now to say what I think, and I'm the first to admit that the United States has made mistakes. My advice to my Indian friends is that they also have a little bit of humility and historical perspective and be willing to admit when they make a colossal blunder. And as I look at how India has operated in Bangladesh in the past and at the present, I think they're pursuing a policy which does not advance India's interests. They are, in a sense, throwing good money after bad. They're in a hole and they're still digging, whatever metaphor you want to use. The Indians can do this if they want, but continuing to shelter the former dictator, sheltering those who were her cronies, who were involved in crimes against humanity, who were involved in financial crimes. Obviously, that is not going to be something welcomed by Bangladesh or seen as a friendly act. The way that at a government-to-government level, the Indian government has refused to engage with Bangladesh, I think is ultimately a mistake. Much of this disinformation that I've talked about is coming from India. I'm not sure who exactly it's coming from in India, but it's pretty clear that you can see where this disinformation starts and how it spreads. And the final thing I would say is, and something that drives all of my Indian friends crazy when I say this, is that an Indian friend once told me that the United States should be deferential to India's views regarding Bangladesh because as neighbors, Indians understand Bangladesh better than an American would. Well, I'm sorry to say that based on the media that I've consumed from India, I don't know that there's much basis for saying that the Indian establishment really understands Bangladesh. So my advice to the people of India and the Indian government is to take some time to understand the reality in Bangladesh in 2025 and adjust accordingly. Otherwise, there'll be a generation or more of Bangladeshis who will have their views shaped by the events of this period. And then on the question of aid transparency, I'm not going to get into the specifics of the Trump administration's policies, but I have, during my career and afterwards, been a vocal critic of some of the things that USAID does around the world. I've also seen the life-saving assistance and the hugely successful assistance programs here and elsewhere. But I think the charge that U.S. is not transparent about its aid doesn't reflect reality. It may be that those who don't know what USAID is doing just aren't looking hard enough. For all of you, if you want to take down this address, it's foreignassistance.gov, and you can find more information than you ever wanted to know about U.S. assistance, whether it be in Bangladesh, whether it be in other countries, and it's historical data as well. There's great charts and graphs, and you can dive in if you're a scholar and you want to look at specific programs. And then through the current administration's efforts to reform or change the way USAID is done, a lot of additional information is being made available. Again, several issues now come together, and this will be my final word, of the pernicious impact of disinformation. In recent weeks, we've seen this disinformation about the USAID democracy and governance programs. I differentiate between misinformation and disinformation. All of us have probably been guilty of hearing something from someone and unintentionally passing it along and perpetuating something that's not true. I've done it. I'm sure Ambassador Milam may have done it once or twice, and some of you in the room may have. Somebody tells you something, you either quite don't understand what they've said, or you believe them to be accurate, and then you pass it on to somebody else. So you're spreading something that's not true. That to me is fundamentally different than someone being a liar and spreading disinformation. And that's what's happened with regard to this story about USAID in Bangladesh. President Donald Trump spread some information which was not true. Somebody told him something, and whoever did that did a disservice by telling President Trump something that was not true, and President Trump unfortunately repeated that. I don't blame President Trump for that. I don't expect the President of the United States to know the details of a small USAID program in Bangladesh. But those who are spreading the disinformation, including the former State Minister for Information, know that it's not true, and they're deliberately spreading a lie to undermine this government, to destabilize this country, and to harm U.S. and Bangladesh relations. And what's particularly ironic for me is to see a post by the former State Minister for Information raising some concern and passing along this, this information about this mysterious USAID program implemented by a company nobody knows with only 2 people. And then you can just Google and see pictures of him proudly standing behind a banner which says Democracy International. And he and his colleagues from CRI and throughout the former regime must have participated in hundreds of programs funded by USAID and USAID partners. So they know that this is a lie. They know that this is not true. Yet they're spreading it to undermine this government, to undermine civil society, to undermine the US-Bangladesh relationship. And their goal in this, distract attention from the evils of their regime and to try to create a condition in which there's instability here, there's uncertainty, and the hope that someday they may be able to return. So we know they're lying, we know what the truth is, and what we have to do is confidently and aggressively push back against those lies.
Thank you, John. Bill, would you like to add?
No, I agree with everything he said on that. I don't always agree with everything he says, but
Thank you.
no, I'm glad he got a chance to answer that question too, because there's an awful lot of disinformation out there. He knows a lot more about it than I do.
Thank you. Mr. Jahid Islam Khan, please.
Can you hear me? Thank you. I'm Dr. Zahid. I'm affiliated to two universities. One which I work as a registrar and a faculty in Dhaka, private one, and the other one is the University of Reading as a visiting research fellow in the Politics and International Relations Department. So it's a good audience, good lecture. I'm actually compelled to make some observation, which as an academic would be a crime not to make, particularly when I'm hearing Dan. You actually remind me that one of the quotes of Aristotle, which has aged well, Plato is dear, truth is dearer. So Dan, you are dear, but truth is dearer. So let me come to you with the first truth. When you make the claim that we should have listened less to the Brigadier General and generals, it's a new claim that I'm hearing as an academic first. I normally read research papers, peer-reviewed research papers, so I'm not sure where you've picked up, maybe as a diplomat. It raises two very important questions. First, is there something wrong in the US diplomatic corps training system where they have forgotten which groups to value more over the other, and the collating of the information? And the second, and intuitively second question that comes from you, this claim that you have made today here, which I will follow up with current diplomats, past and present, to see how correct it is to be used as a knowledge, is that what is the group that you are now listening and dominating your thought process? So this is the first thought. The second one is you have highlighted misinformation battle, which Bangladeshis are failing now. The critical question that you need to ask, and you have actually hinted during the Q&A session a little bit, the center of this misinformation is Washington, and to some extent is White House. So why don't you pick up your pen and write an op-ed, or preferably a research paper, based on corpus analysis of discourses, evidencing the misinformation origin that would serve the academic community like me. And my third point, which is...
Please make it short.
Yeah, this one is...
No more points.
This is critical for both the diplomats because, and this is a factual one, if you have read the IPS specifies 5 treaty allies, 9 partners, and 3 challengers or revisionist actors. It mentions India 15 times, Pacific Islanders 13 times, Bangladesh none, Bay of Bengal none. It mentions that United States objective is to make India a net security provider for this region and a regional hegemon. Now, as a diplomat, that has empowered India to do what they have done here in this region. As a diplomat, when you served here, where were you to shaping this policy document instead of making activism or engagements? That is my critical question. Can you highlight on those part of your job? Thank you.
Can I just respond to that before we move on?
Okay.
So I appreciate the question, and I welcome debate and I welcome disagreement. With regard
these
to,
are
well, first, just as a
university,
disclaimer, I've said
faculty,
I'm not an academic,
and,
so
he's
I'm
also
not
former,
about to
Air Force officer.
pretend that I have academic credentials or that I can speak to academic literature models. I'm a practitioner, and that's the perspective from which I'm speaking. And I try to make it a point to only speak about things I know and have direct knowledge of. With regard to your question, again, reflection on my comments about mistakes the United States made in 2007, 2008, I'm not sure what your point is exactly. Now, so I'll restate my point, and then we can take it from there. I think the United States and others, including people in Bangladesh, gave too much importance to the views of the serving army leadership in that transition period. I don't think enough importance was given to the civilians in that government and to other actors in Bangladeshi society, whether they be civil society, the political actors, or the business. Armies are great at lots of things. Armies are great at fighting wars. Armies are great at doing peacekeeping. Armies can be great at delivering humanitarian assistance in extremis. Armies are not great in manipulating political systems. So I saw firsthand how the Bangladesh Army tried to manipulate the situation in 2007, 2008, and in many ways, those individuals, not the institution, but those individuals deserve some of the blame for how things turned out, because they made arrangements with individuals based on perceptions and hopes that did not turn out to be true, and maybe on interests which weren't necessarily the best interests of the nation. So I wish the United States and others had not given so much importance to the Army during that period. And during this period, for example, Bill and I have had no interactions with the Bangladesh Army because the Bangladesh Army is not a player on the issues that we are concerned with. We're concerned with the transition to democracy, the human rights situation. We're not here to look at security matters, so there's nothing that we can learn from them about the situation. We've been talking to people who are engaged in this effort to build a new Bangladesh, both from in terms of democracy, human rights, and governance. In terms of who to talk to, there are, 170, 180 million people in Bangladesh. I've lost count. I wish I could talk to every single one of them, but there's only so many hours in the day. Bill and I came here to Dhaka on this trip for 2 weeks. I promised Bill that it would be a relaxing 2 weeks. We'd be here in Ramadan, we'd sleep late, we'd have iftar, and we'd see a few friends. We've been going from 7 in the morning till 10 or 11 at night, every night. And I spend more time refusing invitations than accepting them. And if you look at our schedule, you'll see that we've met people from all walks of life, across the political spectrum, the business community, think tanks, non-governmental organizations, some academics. We try to get different perspectives, and we're about halfway through a 2-week visit. By the time we're done, I'm confident there'll be no major sector of Bangladeshi society that we haven't touched base with. We're smart enough and experienced enough to know who's coming from what angle and how to evaluate that information. So compared to those who don't even bother to step foot in Bangladesh and are only parroting the views of one side, I think our analysis and our information gathering is as objective as it can be. With regard to disinformation from Washington, if your claim is that misinformation and disinformation originate in Washington, I'd like you to show me the receipts, because I can show you the receipts of where the rumors start. And with regard to Bangladesh and this disinformation war, they start in India. They start with the Awami League apologists, whether they be in India or elsewhere. They're not started by the U.S. government. The U.S. government is sometimes brought into the discussions because the way this works, the model that's used is you put a lie out there, and then you get others to spread that lie, and then you hope that somebody in the media picks up that lie, and then you hope that a bigger media house picks up that lie, and then you hope that somebody in officialdom in Washington or London repeats that lie. And you set the narrative, and that's what's happening, and that's an objective truth. And as an academic, I would encourage you to do some research, and before you make those claims, come with your receipts and show me the examples of where Washington is starting to spread disinformation about Bangladesh. And finally, with regard to the Indo-Pacific strategy, as I mentioned, as a diplomat serving overseas, I may have provided input into the Indo-Pacific strategy. During the years of the Indo-Pacific strategy that you're mentioning, I wasn't working on this region. But that said, those who are making that strategy and making it available are reflecting their view of what the best way to advance U.S. objectives are. So if the best way to advance U.S. objectives in the Indo-Pacific is to have a strong relationship with India, I think we'd take that at face value. Again, on the disinformation side and the misinformation side, during the previous regime, in order to deflect attention from its own misdeeds and to somehow make the United States' role here controversial, spread a lot of disinformation about the Indo-Pacific strategy and the U.S.'s role, with this canard about St. Martin Island being the reason why the United States was advocating for democracy and human rights. Everyone knows there's no military role for St. Martin's Island. No one's going to build a naval base or an air base there. And this is a pattern that's gone on for a number of years here in Bangladesh. When there were discussions, for example, about a humanitarian assistance agreement, everyone spun this into some conspiracy theory, when the reality was we simply wanted a way to be able to deliver humanitarian assistance more effectively. There was also a big controversy, I remember, about the ACSA, the Acquisition and Cross-Servicing Agreement, that this must be the conspiracy that the U.S. is pursuing to dominate Bangladesh, when it was a very simple thing. If there's a Bangladeshi ship in the Bay of Bengal doing an exercise with an American ship, and the Bangladeshi ship needs to be refueled, and the American ship has excess capacity, the American ship would be happy to refuel the Bangladeshi ship, but there needs to be a legal basis for that in our country. You can't just give away government resources without an agreement to do so. So if Bangladesh had signed an ACSA, the American ship could fill up the Bangladeshi ship. So these innocuous things that the U.S. has done and continues to do get spun into these wild fantasy conspiracy theories, which ultimately don't advance Bangladesh's interests and don't advance the U.S. interests.
General Amin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very happy to be here, Ambassador Milam and Mr. Danilovich, and thank you for a very frank conversation. I'll be very relevant to the issues of today, the new dawn in Dhaka. But unfortunately, the dawn has got clouded, very badly clouded already. The issue that I like to raise here, I should say Mr. Danilovich has very rightly and very well defended the US policies here. You also talked about the Indian involvement. My point is that US-Bangladesh relations definitely have to factor in India, US-India relations. I'll not go into the details, you're all, you have all the expertise, but I'd like you to take this message, that this policy of seeing Bangladesh through Indian lens is the main cause of our misery. You're not treating us as an independent sovereign state. Please take this message to the US government and to the US Congress. Why should US, for its own security interests, try and create a regional hegemon who destroys democracy? Is whatever Sheikh Hasina has done is all because sponsored by India. And today, you talked about Gen Z. I appreciate your point. I feel that Gen Z is in now trouble because of Indian policies. You talked about Infowar. I say that it's also diplomatic war they're launching. Let me quote you. A few days back, maybe a week back, our foreign advisor had a meeting with Mr. Jaishankar, somewhere in a multilateral meeting. And our ambassador clearly explained to him that Bangladesh is not an enemy of India. Bangladesh has really no issue with the minorities. Please help stop this propaganda. And then yesterday, after a week, Indian Foreign Office makes public statement that India is highly worried about minority rights in Bangladesh. Number two, India wants inclusive.
Make it very short.
It's very important. Inclusive election now. Where were they, inclusive election, for last 15, 20 years? That's why I would urge upon you, former Ambassador Milam and Mr. Tendelovich, to please try and help Bangladesh as, let's say, as a friend of Bangladesh, as a lobby for Bangladesh, not the government of Bangladesh, people of Bangladesh, to try and educate, as you said, you educate the US government, educate the US Congress, that this kind of policy should not be followed. And you want democracy, you want human rights, you want human rule of law, but it can't be done when you help a big neighbor to dominate a small neighbor.
Thank you, General.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Zohiruddin Sapon, former Member of Parliament. Mr. Zohiruddin Sapon.
No, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here, and thanks to CGS. And it's nice to see Ambassador Milam and John, because I met with them in USA. And most of the questions we had, it is already discussed. Just I want to appreciate Ambassador Milam and John and to appreciate them to continue for Bangladesh, for democracy process and the transparency, and finally that should be a transformed Bangladesh with all the quality democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Nazmul Haq Pradhan, former Member of Parliament.
Thank you very much to give me floor. I'd like to ask one question to Mr. John. Last tenure of Sheikh Hasina, how Washington works here? I can't know it. How you work, sir? As because your ambassador when goes to his Mr. Badilal's house, his car was rampant, and when he was moved, somebody chased him. How you work last 10 to 15 years?
Thank you. Ms. Sonia Zaman Khan, welcome. Later.
Thank you very much, esteemed panel, and thank you for having me over. It's very good to see a candid conversation by former diplomats. It's always a breath of fresh air. I say it because I come from a household where my father was an ex-diplomat, so I understand. Coming back to democracy and democratic transition, I see my mentor, Professor Ali Riaz, who's also here, and many other people like Mr. Badiul Alam Majumdar, and so forth. So moving forward, let me, based on your experience both in Bangladesh and in the region as a diplomat, one of the reasons why we have faltered was because of lack of elections, of course, being held regularly. And when there aren't elections, political governments are not accountable. Despite all the promises made for reforms, whether it was back in 2008-9 or before and subsequently, we keep failing. How do we, at this juncture of transition once again, can ensure that the political governments who will come to power, whoever, in whatever shape they come in, will ensure accountability? Is there another citizens' charter, political charter that we can all come up with before elections that will compel them to adhere to the basic tenets of democracy, of accountability, of holding free and fair elections on a regular basis, either through the caretaker government or through the establishment of a permanent, free and fair election commission? From your experience, can you suggest something so that the political parties are compelled to sign this charter, to believe this charter, to honor this charter and the will of the people? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Asif Ibrahim. Asif Ibrahim.
Thank you very much, finally, to a business leader, because John talked about economic diplomacy as well. John, if you remember, I haven't had the opportunity to be here when Ambassador Milam was here. I was finishing my studies in USA. But I worked very closely with Ambassador Mozena. And John talked about some conspiracy theories. And if you remember correctly, when I was president of Dhaka Chamber of Commerce and Industry, there was a huge hue and cry about the Trade and Investment Cooperation Forum Agreement, TICFA. And to, to resolve that issue, Ambassador Mozena came to the chamber 2-3 times, and we could convince the civil society as well as some of the members of the, political community that it is for the benefit. It's just a framework agreement for discussion on economy. Okay, so now going forward, you talked about more exports of Bangladesh to USA and also in other areas. We know that the big talk in Washington is now a tariff. However, US had preferential agreements in other parts of the world, like AGOA. I think going forward, under this new dawn that has risen in Dhaka, if we do want to improve the bilateral trade between our both countries, of course, there's just a $6 billion trade deficit there. More US investments coming in infrastructure, in energy-related areas. How can we move forward in that direction? What should be the strategy that should be taken going forward between, I'm talking about B2B, and of course with the help of USTR and from our side, our different private sector entities and the government. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Milam Jon?
Yeah, so let's see, where to start? So first, General Amin, about the clouds on the horizon. I try not to be Pollyannish, and I try to be realistic. Certainly, U.S.-India relations have been a factor in Bangladesh, and as I've said, I agree with you 100%. The U.S. should not look at Bangladesh through Indian eyes. There is a reason for the U.S. to have a strong relationship with India, but that doesn't have to come at the expense of the relationship with Bangladesh. And I think one way of kind of dealing with this is to look at it through not just bilateral basis, but from the U.S. perspective through the Quad. The first thing that Secretary Rubio did was have a meeting with his Quad foreign minister counterparts. That's the U.S., India, Japan, and Australia. So those are 3 other key partners of the United States. And I think from a Bangladesh perspective, looking at things through that Quad perspective, where there are strong relations with Australia, there are strong relations with Japan, strong relations with the U.S., perhaps that's one way of avoiding some of the bilateral tensions and reconciling those. But I agree, and your message to Washington reinforces mine. So I'll be happy when I am arguing in Washington that the U.S. should pursue an independent policy towards Bangladesh, that I can say that the audience members at my event hosted by the Center for Governance Study agreed with me. With regard to the questions about what it was like to operate here during the Hasina government, I can speak with firsthand information or knowledge of my experience from 2008 to 2014, but much of the deterioration happened after that. I mean, I think the 2014 elections was obviously a watershed. The U.S. had strong advocacy in support of free and fair elections and human rights in the run-up to that election. The way it turned out was not the way we wished, and I think maybe the cooling in the U.S. relationship can be kind of traced to that point. I mean, there were earlier signs of it when the caretaker amendment was repealed, et cetera. But the subsequent U.S. diplomats and ambassadors who were working here, I would often remark, it was almost as if they were operating in a hostile environment. I mean, there was a thing in the Cold War where you said Moscow rules, and what that meant is when you were serving at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, you expected as a diplomat to be treated in certain ways that were not too friendly. You would be constantly under surveillance, you would be intimidated, people who you were meeting with would face the kind of harassment. From what I could see from outside, certainly our ambassadors, our diplomats, and our partners face that kind of scrutiny and harassment as well. So it's a new dawn. I mean, coming back to Bangladesh now, I'm very much reminded of the Bangladesh I knew and fell in love with, and I hope that this openness to debate and discussion continues, and that once again in the future it's possible for the U.S. government and U.S. embassy officials to have free and fair and frank discussions with people from across the spectrum and in the same room together. To Sonia's point about elections, accountability, reforms, I mean, this is the $1 million question or the $64 million question or the whatever number you want to put on it. And I'm confident that those working on these issues in the interim government are seized with these as well. We've seen, what's been made public about the process that's underway, and it's certainly a very deliberative process. I share a concern about how the consultation moves beyond just the political parties. I know there was widespread consultation that went into the formulation of the recommendations from the reform commissions. Now those recommendations are being discussed within the consensus committee, with my understanding with the goal of having this July charter signed, which then is the blueprint for reforms. How or whether there will be opportunities as this process goes forward for further consultation with civil society, with the population, I'm not certain. I know it's important, and I'm confident that those working on this also understand its importance, including, of course, Professor Yunus. In terms of accountability, the idea of a citizens charter or something else in parallel or related to this sounds to me, at least, like a great idea. So I would be very interested to see that develop, because ultimately accountability is going to depend on the Bangladeshi people. Ultimately, through elections, and if the caretaker government or a mechanism is put in place that gives reasonable assurance of free and fair elections, then I think that gives the opportunity for citizens to hold individual government officials accountable. But in between elections as well, there are other mechanisms, again, the role of civil society, human rights groups, corruption watchdogs, whether they be formal independent agencies, adjuncts of government, or purely civil society. And then ultimately, whether you like it or not, Bangladesh is part of the international community and is accountable to the international norms to which they've agreed to. And whether this be UN or other agreements and those forum. And before somebody points out the hypocrisy of me talking about human rights when the United States is withdrawn from the UN Human Rights Council, I think that was the wrong decision. So I wish President Trump had not withdrawn the United States from the UN Human Rights Commission, and I hope we'll be back. But that doesn't change the fact that Bangladesh still, as a member, as long as it wishes to continue to be so, should be held accountable. But that's an important point, and I think ultimately that's the key to determine whether this time Bangladesh will get it right. And then the final thing, I wish I had thought of the tikva, because that was another one that I spent countless hours trying to restore some sense of sanity. As you say, a very simple agreement, which, to be honest, put more obligations on the United States than it did on Bangladesh. Because what a tikva did is it forced the U.S. trade representative at a regular interval to focus on Bangladesh and to sit with counterparts from Bangladesh, whether here in Dhaka or in Washington. These meetings would happen, but they would be kind of sporadic. And again, I have great respect for Dan Mozina, who I know loves Bangladesh as much as anyone. One of the great accomplishments of Dan's tenure as ambassador was that he put in place the architecture, the structure to manage the U.S.-Bangladesh relationship with a partnership forum, with the TICFA, with an economic and commercial forum, with a security forum, which ensured that at regular intervals, people from the United States and Bangladesh would sit together and chart a common way forward. So thank you for that. And then the final thing I would say is in terms of trade agreements, Trump administration trade policy is one of the areas where we might see a lot of differences from the past. I compliment individuals in the interim government, including the BIDA chairman, for being very proactive in looking at how to strengthen U.S. Bangladesh trade and investment. And on investment, my single piece of advice for those hoping to see more U.S. investment in Bangladesh is for Bangladesh to treat existing investors well. There are a number of existing American investors, long-term partners of Bangladesh, who, to be honest, weren't fairly treated during the past 17 years. Arrears have built up, discriminatory laws and regulations were put in place. They were disadvantaged because of corruption in various sectors. If these investors' concerns can be addressed, maybe not in full right at once, but if progress can be made towards addressing these, then the existing U.S. investors and existing U.S. companies become the best ambassadors to future investors. So I know there's a big investment summit here happening at the end of April. I know that the U.S.-Bangladesh Business Council is expected to be here. I understand the entire board is coming, which is significant. We're very lucky you're very lucky that Ambassador Peter Haas in his new chapter is still engaged with Bangladesh and is an important voice on the U.S.-Bangladesh Business Council. So I think if you look at the U.S. business community as friends, as people who share the belief that prosperity was a benefit for both nations, I think that's really the key to unlocking this.
Can I see the hands? A lot of them. Please.
So we leave on Saturday, March 14th, early in the morning, so we can stay until then if you're all in agreement.
Thank you. Rizwan was working in Channel I. I'm a television journalist. Probably John could answer my confusion actually. Recently, Donald Trump comment regarding 29 million aid package and our government's statement that Mr. President's claim was not true. What could went wrong actually? Can you please answer?
Sure, it's very simple. You know, President Trump is a busy guy. He's got a lot of things he's working on. It's early in his administration. He has an ambitious agenda. One part of that is this review of U.S. government assistance programs and others through this Department of Government Efficiency. So whatever you think of that, that's the reality. So my assumption is, I have no inside information, my assumption is somebody was given the task of looking at all of the U.S. assistance programs around the world and coming up with some examples that could be pointed to as ways in which the taxpayers' dollars had not been well spent and that those savings could be made by canceling those projects and using those savings for other purposes. So somebody, I'm guessing, saw that there was a USAID program called Strengthening Political Landscapes. And that sounded strange to them because perhaps they've not worked in this field before. So they said, what does strengthening political landscapes make? They probably didn't know anything about Bangladesh. And they said, why would the US do this in Bangladesh? And they saw $29 million and they said, that's a lot of money. So they said, let's put this on the list, a program for $29 million in Bangladesh to strengthen political landscapes. And then there may have been a question of who is implementing that. And somebody said, Democracy International. Never heard of that. Tell me about it. Well, it was started by these two people. Okay, so then it gets out there that, you know, the U.S. is saving $29 million, which is not true. It's a $29 million over 7 years, 28 million of which has already been spent. So the money's already been spent. This isn't future programming. Democracy International is a well-known organization active in Bangladesh and around the world. Yes, two people started it, but probably hundreds, if not thousands of people work there. So what I believe happened is that in the effort to demonstrate that President Trump was following up on his promises to the American people, somebody gave him bad information. And I don't blame them. I don't think it was malicious. I think just in the rush of everything they were doing, they kind of did a sloppy job. And unfortunately, the President of the United States publicly repeated that. The problem is what happened after that. So the facts are clear. They're as I stated. You can go on the Democracy International website. It's all there in black and white. But the damage was done, and it was spun in such a way as to think that Bill Milam and I got $29 million to destabilize Sheikh Hasina. If anyone wants to come and visit my house in Massachusetts, I would welcome you looking for signs that I have my half of $29 million. In fact, Bill probably would have gotten about 20, and maybe I would have gotten 9. But still, I'd be living much better than I am.
Thank you. This is the final round. I'd like to see the hands, and especially from the young boys and girls, students. Okay. Former Member of Parliament, Mr. Shamim.
Thanks, Milam Jon, for having keen interest about Bangladesh. We need your expertise, of course. I have two back-to-back questions. One, you firmly conclude the declaration of election date in 2008 created an obstruction for reform process.
Yes.
If I understood correctly. Don't you think non-declaration of election date for indefinite period will also create political claustrophobia and will create more problems? And another firm questions in the upcoming election, whenever it would be, do you think Bangladesh need a inclusive election or a excluded election where the last government or last Awami League party will be excluded? What is better for Bangladesh in your opinion? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kazi Fasal bin Shiraz, please. Mike, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think since January, it has been quite a bit of journey to understand what is emerging. And these kind of events are really useful in terms of understanding and at least a little bit of help in terms of connecting the dots in terms of what is emerging. And as human being, we try to see pattern, and we have also seen the patterns being shattered in the 2-3 weeks. So I guess my question would be, in the quest of understanding what is emerging, especially related to the US domestic issues and their effect in the foreign affairs and foreign aid and issues like that, what are some of the early signs that these are the permanent emergence, whatever is emerging is permanent, and some of that we actually need a lot of time to wait before we say that, oh, this is related to domestic political cycle and it cannot be that permanent. Thank you.
Thank you. Maruk, Nadia, please. Sure. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Maruk Mohyuddin from UPL, and good to see you in person, Ambassador Milam, and thanks for writing the book you did on Bangladesh, Pakistan, flirting with failure. And also, John, thanks for highlighting on the agency that Bangladesh has shown. And I think, terming this uprising as a color revolution is a disservice to that agency that Bangladesh asserts. And I just wanted to also, go back to your comment about the civil-military relationship, which you highlighted. And, if you can share some of your experiences of other countries who have improved civil-military relationship. And I think this is really a key element. And in the past few decades, the decay in the democratic practices in the bureaucracy, and also the disconnected relationship between the people and the bureaucracy and the military. How can we put those dots back together? I think it's of foremost importance before we are able to connect with the world with confidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Rafiq. So I'm taking all the questions and then, yeah.
Thank you, Ambassador Milam and Mr. John. Actually, I didn't want to ask any question. The question which I prepared to ask, that has already been asked. But as you know, the relation between two countries strengthens when the relationship between not only the states or countries, even the governments and the people. There is other equation, international equation, that also compel the maintenance of two countries' relation. Suppose while you are maintaining the relation to Bangladesh, that US-Bangladesh relation, the dominating or the more powerful countries around this region, suppose India or China, you will consider these two countries while you are maintaining relationship with Bangladesh. So it is not only the interest of the two countries. It depends the equation that you are maintaining with the powerful nations surrounding that country. So in that case, how you will proceed while maintaining relationship with Bangladesh, the bilateral relationship in the forthcoming days, in view of these two nations or other powerful nations around. Thank you very much.
Microphone is please.
Thank you everyone. I must admit it was a very wonderful session. First, it was not a question at first, but now I want to ask, as Sir already mentioned that, I want to complete that. As a student, I want to ask that, do you think a party who has done genocide to the people of Bangladesh is really can participate election, the next election? That is the question actually. And the second question, which was my actual question, is that recently in Oval Office, the scene we have seen between Ukrainian president and American president, it was kind of shocking to me because in Bangladesh we heard a line, we always keep it in our mind that we always stand with our friends. And if I see that a partner or a friend is not standing to a friend when it actually needed most, and he has been asked about his clothing while the richest man of the world, Elon Musk, was present in another program with the same person. So my question actually is that how, as a partner, Bangladesh will believe USA while USA is not standing his true friend like Ukraine. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Hello, I'm Ibnu Ahmed from Dhaka University. By my activism, I'm a disability rights activist. Actually, after that uprising, politicians and political parties are raising their voice about inclusive election, but none of them has talked about inclusive participation. Actually, I would like to ensure the political and civil rights of persons with disabilities, and I would like to draw the attention from all of you to make some reform about the inclusion of persons with disabilities so that they can exercise their political and civil rights. Thank you for giving that opportunity.
So, yeah, please, Barrister Sarwar. Very briefly.
My name is Saror Hussain. I am a practicing lawyer in the Supreme Court Bangladesh and human rights activists. I have a different question. You know that money laundering is the biggest problem in Bangladesh, and the bad political trend that when in power, they plunder the money of the people and take away to the Western country, including USA. So what is your plan about this money laundering? They have emptied our bank. And regarding the misinformation, I think that has been passed by fallen Sheikh Hasina, because in a hesitation, Sheikh Hasina directed his activist to damage the photo of Donald Trump, and she claimed that I will send that photo to Donald Trump. So that might be the source. USA should make a research and disclose the who gave the misinformation in the very beginning to Donald Trump. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Over there, behind you.
My question is a bit different.
What's your name, please?
My name is Onim Saeed. You can just call me Saeed. The proposed Bangladeshi version of the Indo-Pacific strategy will have 5 pillars: free and open, connected, prosperous, secure, and resilient. The entire strategy has 2 frameworks, economic and security. Do you have any thoughts on that? Thank
Mike,
you.
please.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Arafat Ashwad Islam. I have a lighter question. What is your prediction in the upcoming election? Who do you think will form the next government? And I don't want a diplomatic answer from you.
Yeah, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. You? Mike, please. No, Mike.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity to say something. Very delighted to see you both. My question is that U.S. government for a long time, they have been...
please. Name and...
My name is Simon. I work in Color Control. It's the Delhi news media. So my question is that USA for a long time, they have been raising their voice on behalf of press, media, and their freedom. So the new administration led by Donald Trump, what's your response? I would like to know that will they stay on behalf of the journalists and the freedom of voice all over the world?
Thank you. Anyone from media? Anyone from media? No, then Mr. Abul Hassan Chaudhry, former State Minister for Foreign Affairs.
May I first of all thank you, Mr. Zillur Rahman and the Center for Governance Studies for bringing 2 very, very close friends of Bangladesh, 2 distinguished diplomats who bring not just a wealth of experience in this meeting, but we know that they have total commitment to deepening ties with Bangladesh for its economic and political benefits. I would be very brave, if that is at all possible for a Bangladeshi, by first of all welcoming them not just for this occasion but repeatedly, and raise only 2 issues. One is, of course, they know and can educate me perhaps on this, that 2 of the main pillars in which our economy has flourished. One is, of course, the remittance, the other is the RMG sector. And as we hear, the US of A is one of the biggest, largest export destination. As we hear of this ominous thoughts and tirades about tariff, that we shall not come into their mischief. But of course, a lot of that work will have to be done by us. And I entirely agree that these road shows do not bring investors. It is the regime of stability and predictability. On the question of information, may I bring to the notice of our very good friends that there is a misinformation where there is an element of innocence, then there is disinformation where there is innocence spiked with a bit of cunning, but what we are getting from across the fence is perverted information. To give a good example, we all know about this $29 million and $21 million. The media, by and large, 90%, are only talking about the utterance directed for Bangladesh. They're not talking about the mention of the money that given to them. And I have often thought about my very, very good friend, the illustrious personality, Mr. Badiul Alam Majumdar, and I would like to tell him, in the language of Oscar Wilde, that the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. So you can take that assurance. The other thing, John, about this, you jolted my memory. Sometimes the footnotes are deleted. When Hana was proposed, I was involved in the dispensation which agreed to it. Not only I was involved, at that time the Honorable Prime Minister and the Honorable Foreign Minister was away. I thought it was not only innocent, I thought it was so good for the country, I within a few minutes approved it. And I came under so much, some of my former diplomatic colleagues, and certainly my very esteemed, respected former colleague, Minister Professor Said would know, under such heavy criticism, all sorts of threatening words. I have to recall here the Honorable Finance Minister, Mr. Kibria, came greatly to my rescue. The reason why I say this is that sometimes the news is made and we don't wait to see the veracity of it or to what extent it imports. And my last and concluding point would be that we are coming in for all sorts of experiments in nation building, in constitution making, in reforms, in the matter of economy. So I would see that this dialogue is not just a one-off thing. The both of you are committed, undoubtedly. Everybody in this room, most of us, know that your friendship goes much beyond. Ambassador Milam in his days wanted to create an ethos. Those were the first days of our getting back into a democratic order after a period of martial law. And John, you have your heart and soul for many aspects of Bangladesh, that this should be in an institutional basis for the way things work. Some things work in Bangladesh, which is called tadbir. It happens. I had in one occasion told Singaporeans in Singapore that, damn it, man, we are more efficient than you are. They sort of looked at me and said, what's this guy saying? I said, look, in Dhaka, if you know the minister, you can wake him up at 2 o'clock at night. You cannot do that even in the efficient Singapore. Now, America works with lobbyists. So I would hope that to further our cause, the government or the other parties would be thinking, but you two are lobbyists of a different scale. You are a friend, so that must continue, and this should be institutionalized. Once again, I renew my thanks. And as you have also known in Bangladesh, that there is a saying that guests can come at their will. They only go when we let them go. So thank you very much.
John, it's your turn.
Great. So, a bunch of great questions, and I love the tough questions. I'm a big believer in freedom of speech. Yeah. I'm a big believer in freedom of speech, and I firmly believe that if there's speech you don't like, the answer to that is more speech. So I'm all for that. In terms of my analysis on the election date and how that played out in 2007-8 and what that means for today, I think that the problem in 2007-8 was setting an arbitrary date, not having a conditions-based date. So elections should take place when they should take place, and once a date is set, then in the negotiations, which are an inevitable part of this process, the government of the day that will be replaced by elections loses all its leverage, and time is on the side then inevitably of the other side. So first come to an agreement on what should happen, and then from that derive the date of when it should happen. And on the issue of inclusivity and making accounts for people with disabilities and the rights of all to participate freely, absolutely, and I know the people involved are focused on that as well. Whether changes are permanent, no change is ever permanent. I think within the U.S. system right now, after an election with a strong mandate, President Trump is setting the initiative, but there are other forces that will inevitably come to bear on foreign policy and domestic policy. The Congress, for example, and other institutions. So I have a sense that when you look at it, while the executive branch still has primacy in foreign relations, there are other important voices that will end up having a moderating role. I couldn't agree more about the need to work on civil-military relations in Bangladesh. It's not a problem unique to Bangladesh. The UN report highlighted the need for security sector reform. We've tried some of that here in Bangladesh, although not at scale. I remember in the past there was also a U.S. government initiative, another terrible acronym, DIRI, D-I-R-I, which was a Defense Institutions Reform Initiative. We in the United States have a very specific view of civil-military relations, which I recognize may not be appropriate in all. But for us, the cornerstone of civil-military relations is civilian supremacy. So when General MacArthur disagrees with President Truman, General MacArthur loses his job, not President Truman. So there are examples around the world. Again, academics can consult the literature on what are the best transitions from military regimes to civilian regimes, from autocratic regimes to democratic, and what's the appropriate role of armed forces. The tough question of whether or not the Awami League should be able to participate in the elections and whether everyone should be able to participate, what inclusivity means, is the toughest question there is, and I'm glad it's not my question ultimately to answer. This is a question the people of Bangladesh will have to answer. And I've been vocal on my views, and my views have evolved over time. I started out from a firm position of saying you have to have an election, everyone has to participate, and if a political movement is discredited, the best verdict can be rendered by the people by rejecting them at the ballot box. I recognize, however, there are exceptions to that, and people point out lots of good examples of other countries in which it made sense to ban a political party permanently or temporarily. The issue of political space in Bangladesh is one that's utmost on everyone's mind, and recent events with demonstrations in the streets of Dhaka from some who have one extreme view have also highlighted this. In a democracy, there are rights, but there are also responsibilities. So how do you balance this at an individual level, at an institutional level, at a political level? If a political party wants to exercise its rights, yet it refuses to accept any of the responsibilities for those that come along with those rights, then do they forfeit their ability to participate in the system, whether on an individual or collective level? I mean, ultimately, I think the answer should be which solution will best lead Bangladesh forward. And in terms of accountability, the only mechanism for accountability is not whether or not somebody is able to participate in the elections, which is why the International Crimes Tribunal process and the legal process of bringing those to account is also critically important. But I admit, for me, it's the toughest question Bangladesh now faces. So I wish you well. On the Zelensky-Trump meeting, what I would just say there is, I think you need to sometimes, differentiate between tactics and strategy. Each president, each person in a negotiation has different tactics. In terms of the consistency of U.S. policy, it's just a fact of life that in a democratic system, different governments come and they might have different policy priorities. On an issue not related to security, but on global climate change, I was here in Dhaka during a transition of administrations. And one day I went and saw somebody in the foreign ministry, and I delivered a démarche, a formal communication from the U.S. government related to global climate change. Several days later, after an inauguration, I had to go back and say, remember everything I told you on Friday? Well, we no longer believe that. So this is just part and parcel of diplomacy. And on the specifics of Ukraine and Ukraine policy, obviously a change in U.S. policy affects the situation on the ground in Ukraine. Others also have a role to play, whether it be Europe, whether it be other parts of the world. So I think it's just a reality. And, we can each have our own personal opinion. And, similar, the situation in Palestine. I, as a matter of principle, try to only talk about things I know about. So it's not a cop-out. I've never served in Russia, Ukraine. I've never served in the Middle East. My knowledge is cursory at best, so I wouldn't hazard to offer an opinion. On terms of money laundering, recovery of assets, absolutely. The U.S. government, I hope, will fully cooperate, as I hope the British and others do in the safe havens for proceeds of corruption. There's a formal legal process that can be followed. There also may be a possibility as part of some, plea bargain agreements that people can pay restitution, and then how to use those funds, I think, is a good question for the government. In terms of the Indo-Pacific strategy, one thing interesting and unique about the United States is we publish all of our policy documents. The U.S. National Security Strategy, the U.S. National Military Strategy, the U.S. National Defense Strategy, the U.S. Foreign Policy Strategy are all public documents. The trick is, though, you have to make sure you're reading the latest version, because you can't refer to a policy document that was written in the past and think that it necessarily represents the policy of today. It may well have been updated. The other thing is that, it's kind of an iterative process. The U.S. has a policy toward the Indo-Pacific, but then, for example, we're part of the Quad. So for me, at least, the U.S. policy is important, but that's something that contributes to the formulation of a broader policy. The Quad is not an alliance, but if a statement by the U.S., Indian, Australian, and Japanese foreign ministers comes out in the first day of the Trump administration, that would be the document I would look for to see what is the U.S. priority along with its Quad partners in the Indo-Pacific. And then I have no hesitation in making a prediction for the election. So I hope everyone in the media is paying attention, because this is what you'll be judged me on when I come back. My prediction for the election is that the party that wins the most votes and seats will form the next government.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Just closing remarks.
Okay. I don't know if I can top John in that prediction. And in fact, John and I don't try to top each other. I wanted to say something because the lady over there asked about the $64 quadrillion question. How do we know that the next government's going to actually behave itself, carry out the things that will maintain and sustain a democracy? And the answer is you have to make sure it does. It's up to you and you and you and you. I mean, it's up to the people in the end, isn't it? And it's the people that make democracies work, because they rise up and change things, or if they don't, things go awry. And that's what happened here in. It didn't happen in 1990. But it happened in 2007 and 8. It happened again when the Awami League started changing things after 2014. And I documented is the wrong word, but I followed that and wrote about it in the Friday Times and other papers, because I could see what she was doing. She was slowly taking democracy away. And, it got to the point where there were no elections, really. An election was called, but it never really happened. And the only way it could have been stopped, I think, peacefully, is for the government to have been voted out. And that's up to the people who vote. So really, it's everybody's responsibility. Now, you can say, and I've heard it, and I actually worry about this, that some things will get so far along that a government, be it Sheikh Hasina or whoever, will take actions to make sure that people can't vote, that elections disappear, and then you lose democracy. So the people have to be on guard for that. They have to watch out, because I think the only way to stop it is to vote them out. So anyway, now I will end by saying I've had a really good time here. Thank you all very much for your warm reception and your difficult questions as well as your nice questions, because they make us think. And, whoops, sorry, I keep hitting this microphone. I don't like microphones, actually. But we are, again, I want to repeat that we have had a great visit here so far. We've got more to go. We've learned a lot. But we did not come to either tell the U.S. government what we were doing or what you were doing. We did not come to make any promises about what the government would do. We came to find out what's going on and hopefully to try to help a little bit. Now, a tiny little organization like ours can't help a lot. It can't provide great amounts of assistance or something like that. But we can maybe talk to people like this, like we did today, smaller groups, larger groups, and we can try and understand what's going on, translate that back to people in Washington, because not only the government in Washington some of them will be interested, but many of the organizations who also work on human rights and democracy will want to know. So we're going to be involved, and we're going to be back here, so we hope to see you all again in the next year or so. But I want to say thank you very much for being so welcoming and being so nice. Thank you.
As we close these insightful discussions, I want to extend my deepest gratitude to Ambassador William B. Milam, to John Danilovich for sharing their experiences, wisdom and perspective with us today. The reflections on Bangladesh's democratic journey and its evolving relationship with the United States has given us much to consider as we navigate this new chapter in our history. Please join me to thanking them with applaud. We sincerely thank you all, our distinguished guests, scholars, journalists, and members of civil society for your active participation. The future of Bangladesh democracy depends on informed dialogue, and today's discussion has reinforced the importance of open, constructive conversation like this. At CGS, we remain committed to fostering this essential discussion on governance, democracy, human rights, and international engagement. Let this not be the end, but the beginning of further reflection and action. Thank you again, and I wish you all an excellent rest of the day. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
That was a lot of fun. Thank you.